Chapter 1162, Happy New Year. The newly created Ministry of Supernatural Affairs and its first Minister of Supernatural had swiftly consolidated power. This unprecedented office, appointed directly by the cabinet, wielded supreme authority across all branches of government. With a single decree, the minister could marshal nearly every state resource. Yet such sweeping power carried its own burdens and risks, and no one on the minister's team seemed eager to bear them. Just past midnight, an urgent meeting was called. Bright lights banished every shadow from the conference room, amplifying the atmosphere of solemnity. Around the long table sat the ministry's entire leadership, the section chiefs, supervisors, directors, and department heads. Their faces were drawn and tense, each of them keenly aware that the night's decisions would determine not only the ministry's future, but the fate of the nation's supernatural policy as a whole. The Office of Supernatural Affairs isn't overseen by a director, but by the Minister of Supernatural Affairs, since it reports directly to the cabinet. The minister cleared his throat and spoke deliberately. This is the department's first truly large-scale supernatural operation since our founding. We're about to confront an unknown force, something science can't explain, yet we have a duty to stand our ground and safeguard our citizens. The office itself is divided into several specialized branches, each with its own mandate. At its core sits the On-Site Investigation Division, charged with probing supernatural incidents in the field. Its agents come from the Metropolitan Police and Public Security Bureau, former Self-Defense Forces Special Operations Units, and hand-picked specialists transferred from the United States through secure channels. All have endured rigorous military training, honed their investigative techniques to a fine edge, and built the psychological resilience needed to face the inexplicable. Fully equipped with state-of-the-art gear, they are the department's spearhead against the unknown. Beyond standard automatic firearms, the Supernatural Affairs Department fields a suite of high-tech military gear, drone reconnaissance systems for live surveillance, night vision and infrared goggles, Kevlar-reinforced bulletproof vests, and more, ensuring its agents maintain a decisive edge in any operation. At the department's core is the Intelligence Analysis Division, its strategic think tank. Specialists here pore over the island nation's rich tapestry of myths and folklore, mining ancient manuscripts and oral histories for patterns that might illuminate paranormal activity. Their vast archives of literature and documents are complemented by cutting-edge data analysis software, which rapidly synthesizes disparate information streams and delivers vital intelligence to field teams. Beyond historical research, this division meticulously examines suspected supernatural cases, employing scientific methodology and logical reasoning to uncover the hidden truths behind each incident. Working in tandem is the On-Site Investigation and Evidence Collection Unit. These operatives conduct painstaking fieldwork wherever a paranormal event has occurred, scouring the scene for occult artifacts, recording anomalous energy signatures, and securing every piece of physical evidence. Each find is carefully cataloged and transported back to headquarters for further analysis, ensuring no clue is ever overlooked. These devices have become indispensable tools for unraveling supernatural mysteries. Equipped with portable X-ray scanners and electromagnetic field detectors, the teams can gather the most precise data and evidence available. Within the Office of Supernatural Affairs, the International Cooperation and Communication Department serves as a diplomatic bridge, liaising with local governments, municipal police forces, and international organizations. They maintain close partnerships with U.S. agencies such as the FBI, CIA, and Defense Intelligence Agency to confront transnational supernatural threats together. Although this model of international cooperation has unquestionably strengthened the office's capabilities, it has also introduced a web of political considerations and conflicting interests. The Office of Supernatural Affairs occupies an awkward perch within the state apparatus, formally recognized, yet subtly challenged by rival supernatural response units set up independently by both the cabinet and the self-defense forces. A quiet competition simmers beneath the surface as each branch vies for authority in matters beyond the ordinary. What's even more troubling is that the regular U.S. Army appears to be quietly making its own plans, and their covert involvement only complicates matters further. At the same time, the Supernatural Affairs Bureau is already stretched to its limits in both equipment and firepower, which dramatically raises the mission's difficulty and the danger for everyone involved. These operatives, however, aren't green recruits. They're hand-picked elites drawn from every corner of the government, each bringing a wealth of real-world experience and specialized skills. Among them are tracking and counter-tracking specialists, hackers fluent in electronic warfare and cybersecurity, and experts in both medical treatment and psychological assessment. The U.S. personnel embedded alongside them are even more battle-hardened, veterans who faced life-and-death tests on actual battlefields. Their arrival undoubtedly boosts the Bureau's overall effectiveness, but it also introduces a new layer of uncertainty. Every faction behind these agents has its own agenda and resources, and their hidden loyalties could tip the balance at any moment. Chapter 7. The Supernatural Affairs Office walked a tightrope. The U.S.-controlled Bureau had outright ignored the Minister of Supernatural Affairs, while other agencies fawned either over the Prime Minister or the Chaebol conglomerates, each backed by a powerful deity with deep-reaching influence. Every assignment meant delicate negotiations. One misstep could offend a hidden god or topple a political alliance. The vessel of the divine has arrived in Kyoto, the briefing read. Minister Hayashi glanced up from the report. Let's pray everything goes according to plan. He'd been thrust into the spotlight as the nation's public face for supernatural crises, a golden opportunity that could just as easily become his undoing. Protocol 16991, Book 1, Article 1, warned that the chances of failure were alarmingly high. Without direct intervention from the world god, who else could subdue the colossal monster threatening the city? For now, mass evacuation was their only option. A squadron of military helicopters roared in low. As the dust settled on the makeshift helipad, Saiko Busujima, Utaha Kasumigaoka, and Shizuka Hiratsuka stepped down in full gear. Even from 50 yards away, the island's latent spiritual and demonic energies crackled visibly around them, a stark reminder of the battle that lay ahead. Saiko Busujima's family answered the call too, headed by Shinichiro Busujima himself. But in the end, only 10 psychics stood on their side. Psychics and demons keep their distance, not out of conscious hostility, but because, at a subconscious level, each feels a profound irritation toward the other. Demon energy and spiritual power simply can't coexist. Most of the demons still walking among us are holdovers from wartime experiments. A few more, like the Wakatsuki Samurai or the so-called Julius creations, were engineered by new, cutting-edge research. They remain a small minority, though. Psychics outnumber them by far. And as long as a psychic can master their fear, face down a demon or monster, there's hope they'll awaken their true power. When Tokyo learned this, the island nation scrambled together suicide squads drawn from the self-defense forces and the police, essentially using human lives as fodder to try and forge new psychics under government command. The independent fighters, the martial artists, they refused any higher authority. They only for the fate of over 1 million people in Kyoto. None harbored illusions of victory. They were prepared to die facing an ancient, colossal monster. In the hierarchy of supernatural threats, dragon-class monsters stand at the very pinnacle. Even the most powerful psychics, those who can single-handedly fell ogre-level creatures, would be hopelessly outmatched by a dragon. These colossal beasts can annihilate entire cities in an instant. To humanity, the ultimate embodiment of a dragon-class threat is King Ghidorah, a three-headed leviathan whose mere presence spells utter devastation. Chapter 1163. The Blockade of Kyoto. A cluster of officials stood in uneasy silence. With the arrival of the Maiden of the God on Earth, they seized on the opportunity to seek divine guidance. Shizuka Hiratsuka, now wearing a pair of Cyclops-forged gauntlets that amplified her spiritual power, looked remarkably composed. Maiden, said a representative from the Department of Supernatural Affairs, his voice taut with expectation, have the gods given you any instructions? Shizuka paused, then shook her head. No, he only warned that a colossal monster will appear and destroy Kyoto. Ethan, observing from the edge of the gathering, wondered if Shizuka was choosing her words carefully or simply had no further revelation. In any case, They had no choice but to act on this single, ominous warning. They were in the heart of the Keihanshin metropolitan area, the crowning jewel of the island nation, and even without official reports of supernatural sightings or ghostly attacks, an oppressive tension lay thick in the air, like the calm before a storm. Meanwhile, in a maze of back alleys, a squad of soldiers, dressed in camouflage uniforms, methodically swept through every side street, eyes sharp for the slightest sign of movement. Their gazes were steady and calm, unshaken even by the unknown horrors ahead. To the outside world, the Self-Defense Forces Special Brigade is virtually a legend, an enigma whispered about in military circles across the island nation, where it's officially known as the 15th Brigade and colloquially dubbed the Monster Brigade. Beneath that title lie countless stories of harrowing clashes with Tokyo's nightmarish creatures. This is the nation's sharpest instrument of war, the only unit to have truly faced the razor's edge between life and death. Interwoven among its ranks are active-duty soldiers from America, who mentor their island counterparts, sharing advanced tactics and hard-won battlefield insights. This unique, cross-border collaboration has elevated the 15th Brigade's combat skills and tactical literacy far above those of ordinary self-defense forces units, imbuing the entire brigade with a confident, battle-hardened air. The troops' gear is state-of-the-art, from cutting-edge individual combat systems to high-efficiency communications equipment, underscoring the force's modernization and professionalism. Faced with the looming crisis in Kyoto, the Ministry of Defense moved swiftly, tasking half of the 15th Brigade's elite soldiers with establishing a defensive perimeter. Though elite troops are costly to maintain, their value in a high-stakes operation is beyond question. 4 regiments, some 2,000 carefully selected soldiers, were dispatched, bolstered by regular self-defense forces personnel. In all, over 40,000 ground troops now ring Kyoto, a deployment equal to 1/4 of the nation's entire land forces. Whether such a massive concentration of power will prove decisive remains to be seen. Commanding this vast operation is General Gao Zilong, who carries the burden of responsibility on his shoulders. In the evening light, his silvering hair catches the sun's last rays. His eyes, narrowed yet inviting, suggest a genial temperament, but the star on his epaulet signals a man forged by countless trials, a leader renowned for both his military acumen and his political savvy. Ethan was a capable commander. Though he couldn't claim to be a military genius, he had a knack for navigating court intrigue, and his appointment as leader of this elite brigade spoke volumes about his powerful connections and sharp strategic instincts. Under Ethan's direction, Kyoto's defenses had been transformed into an almost impenetrable fortress. Every critical position was fortified with well-trained, heavily armed troops. No gate, wall, or outpost was left exposed. An advanced radar network, nicknamed Skynet by the soldiers, spanned the city, detecting the faintest hint of movement beyond its walls. Dozens of hidden surveillance posts operated around the clock, transmitting live feeds of streets and alleys. Any sign of unusual activity was flagged and relayed to Ethan's command center in an instant. Despite these precautions, an air of unease hung over Kyoto. Since dawn yesterday, the city had been swept up in an unprecedented wave of migration. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of refugees poured in from the surrounding prefectures. Towns as close as Nagaokakyo struggled to accommodate the sudden influx. Never before had the region faced such a monumental logistical challenge, and even Ethan's meticulous preparations were being tested to their limits. Ethan stood before the command center's giant video wall, watching Kyoto's mass exodus unfold in real time. Outside, streets were choked with families, parents clutching suitcases and backpacks, children clutching their hands, all moving with anxious haste. Faces were drawn and pale, and now and then someone would break into soft sobs. The government had dispatched bus and truck convoys to help, and yet, against this human tide, their efforts seemed almost insignificant. He scanned the map's live feed data, evacuation percentages, traffic backups on every arterial road, progress by district. Pulling off a citywide evacuation in just 48 hours would test any mayor's resolve, but Kyoto was tantalizingly close to meeting the goal. "Sir," an operations officer reported, stepping up to a second console. "We've essentially completed the withdrawal. Only 2% of registered residents remain in the city core, and another 5 to 20% are dispersed in outer zones. Our only major holdup is private traffic. 20 to 30,000 cars are still jammed on the ring roads. Ethan nodded, his jaw set. The final phase was about to begin. He tapped the screen, ready to issue the next round of orders, and determined that no one would be left behind. Gao Zilongyan's brow remained furrowed as he absorbed the news. He knew that, despite the remarkable progress in evacuating Kyoto, the real ordeal was only just beginning. Pulling off such a massive relocation in less than 48 hours had once seemed impossible. The cabinet ministers and the city's wealthiest families were in a state of near panic, haunted by the memory of Tokyo's obliteration. Even now, Gao could still feel the tremor of fear at the thought of that once vibrant metropolis reduced to smoldering ruins by rampaging monsters. Worse still, this new enemy was no mere Ghidorah, a single, mindless destroyer. It intended to use Kyoto's millions of inhabitants as living incubators, birthing an endless legion of abominations. If it succeeded, the consequences would be beyond horrifying. We can't allow this to happen again, Gao vowed under his breath. Kyoto was nothing like the isolated Kunisaki Peninsula. Here, they couldn't simply deploy a scorched earth strategy to wipe the threat from the ground. A more cunning plan was desperately needed. Regardless of whether the outside world was watching live, ordering the bombardment of Kyoto Prefecture was a perilous decision. Destroying a city is easy. Rebuilding it is another matter entirely. And if it really happened, the fallout would be disastrous. The emperor himself would demand retribution. As the minutes ticked by, Gao Zilongyan's mood grew darker. He leaned closer to the window and watched twilight settle over the rooftops. The setting sun cast a warm, golden glow across the city, but beneath that beauty lurked 1,000 threats. "It's the devil's hour," he murmured to himself. Chapter 1164, Happy New Year. The demon season, an interval steeped in mystery and dread in the island's age-old lore, had begun. Legend held that during these days the veil between yin and yang thinned, allowing spirits and mortals to roam side by side. Unpredictable dangers were said to stir in that mingled twilight. Gao Zilongyan knew all too well the stories surrounding this time. Any anomaly demanded immediate attention. Tonight, he sat alone in the dimly lit command center, frowning at the banks of glowing monitors. An unsettling premonition crawled through him like a chill wind, seeping into every corner of the room. The command center's hum was steady, its lights muted. Dozens of screens displayed shifting data, each frame carrying vital information. Then, without warning, a shrill cascade of alarms shattered the calm. Like a boulder plunging into a placid pond, ripples of urgency spread through the control room. "Look, screen 87. A young technician's voice cut through the chaos, trembling with fear. He jabbed at a flickering monitor, his wide eyes fixed on whatever had appeared there. Gao straightened, every nerve on high alert. Demon season had come again, and nothing good ever followed its arrival. Ethan's eyes locked onto the monitor the moment it flickered to life. The feed showed a deserted alley, narrow, grimy walls hemmed in by broken pavement, only a few battered streetlights fighting back the darkness. Each lamp quivered in the breeze, as if ready to die at any second, lending the scene an almost spectral quiet. Then, like a phantom slipping through shadows, something streaked across the frame. It moved impossibly fast, too fast for the naked eye. Ethan's pulse jumped. "Rewind it," he snapped. The technician's fingers danced over the keys, reversing the footage one frame at a time. In that frozen instant, the control room held its breath. At last, the blurry form resolved into something far more terrifying than any human intruder. A misshapen creature with sickly green skin that gleamed under the streetlights, a jagged horn protruding from its forehead, and eyes that burned with an unholy ember-red glow. A strangled scream crackled through the comlink, then everything went eerily silent. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest as he pounded on the transmit button, calling for every nearby unit. Static was the only reply. A shiver of dread slithered down his spine. They weren't just facing a trespasser. Whatever that thing was, it had already gotten to them, and now there was no one left to answer. In less than a few minutes, the entire 20-man squad had been wiped out. Gao Zilongyan's voice shook with anger and disbelief. He'd deliberately broken the force into 20-person teams so they could relay reports quickly and allow for the fastest possible response. Clearly, that plan had failed. "Where's the drone?" he barked. His usual composure vanished in an instant. He roared into the communicator and slammed it against the console. The plastic shell cracked and splintered across the floor, fragments scattering like his shattered calm. The young technician at his side, face pale and eyes wide, stammered aloud, "Sir, the drone is over the target area now, and it's transmitting live footage." In the suddenly hushed command center, each word thundered in the still air. Gao Zilongyan whirled to the monitor just in time to see the creature, the same monster that had ambushed the squad, loom into view. Its massive form filled the screen, sinewy limbs, hide like burnished steel, and eyes glowing with predatory intelligence. Gao Zilongyan's jaw clenched. There would be no second chance. The enemy was smarter, faster, and deadlier than they had ever imagined, and now it was watching them too. Ethan crouched among the ruins, his eyes locked on the towering figure before him. In the faint moonlight, the creature's turquoise skin gleamed with an uncanny sheen, and a pair of curved horns jutted from its forehead. Resting casually on its shoulder was a massive golden club. "Oni," he whispered, a mix of awe and tension in his voice. Ever since the Tokyo catastrophe, demons and monsters had begun emerging across the globe, testing humanity's defenses like never before. As an operative of the supernatural department, Ethan understood just how crucial it was to recognize each threat. This being fit the description of the Oni from Japanese folklore. A stubborn giant, either blood-red or azure-skinned, horns sprouting from its head and wielding a powerful club. Though modern pop culture sometimes portrays Oni as little more than brutal, orc-like brutes, this creature adhered perfectly to the classical image. In Chinese, the word for ghost usually evokes spirits or specters. In Japan, Oni are a wholly different breed of demon, and standing before him now was unmistakably one of the latter. Ethan stared at the monitor in disbelief. Before him loomed the ghost, its hair tangled and matted, sharp horns curving from its skull, and a wide, blood-streaked mouth lined with vicious fangs. Its round, bell-bright eyes glowed copper, reflecting a feral intelligence. The creature's upper body was unnervingly bare and muscular, while a strip of tiger pelt hung around its waist. Its long arms ended in claws honed to razor points. In one massive hand it gripped a brutal mace, its head inlaid with dozens of wolf's teeth, each blade gleaming with deadly promise. Just moments earlier, 20 soldiers had rushed forward to engage it. Now, none remained. Their screams had been silenced, replaced by the sickening crunch of bone and flesh. On the screen, the ghost bit through bulletproof vests as though they were paper, tearing limbs and torsos apart with remorseless efficiency. Bright red blood spattered across the shattered concrete, painting the ruins in a gruesome tableau. Ethan felt his heart pound as the scene burned into his mind. Around him in the command center, faces went pale, and the air grew thick with a terror none had ever known. In that instant, hope felt as fragile as the armor the ghost had reduced to splinters. Heartbeats thundered in their chests and breaths came in ragged gasps as if they might become the monster's next victims at any second. Across the comm channels, frantic voices crackled. "Report, we're under attack, requesting immediate backup." "Ah, monster! This is Team B12. We need assistance. Team C11 here. Send support." Then, all at once, every communicator exploded with static, and the staccato of gunfire crackled through the speakers. The command room felt as if it had been hurled onto the front lines. Commander Gao Zilongyan's face went pale. Deploy demon energy and spiritual power, now! There was nothing left but to issue orders and pray. Meanwhile, beyond the command center, a shirtless figure strode toward the green specter flickering on the holoscreen. It was Ethan. The phantom spotted him and dropped the chunk of meat it had been carrying. Fresh prey was far more satisfying than cold corpses, and a newly killed victim was as fresh as it got. Ethan's lips curved into a cold smile. "Didn't expect to cross paths with a ghost tonight? Let's see what you're really capable of." The man known as the 10-Ghost Snake King Horse coiled his sinewy arms and legs into a fighting stance. The Green Phantom let out a derisive hiss. "Just a human." Chapter 1165, Ghosts of the Millennium Ghost City. What had begun as a one-sided skirmish quickly evened out once demons and spirits threw in their lot. Even so, the human side found it hard to cooperate. Martial artists pride themselves on self-reliance, and few were prepared to take orders from supernatural allies. Still, Saiko Busujima, Shizuka Hiratsuka, and Shizuka Kasumigaoka formed a tentative partnership. They knew they couldn't face this threat alone. Kyoto was a 1,000-year-old ghost city, its alleyways steeped in whispered legends and hidden terrors. Kasumigaoka pressed her back against the cracked stone wall of an abandoned shrine, her voice little more than a breath as she named the ancient monsters that haunted her thoughts. Shuten Doji, Tamamo no Mai, Great Tengu. Each name trembled with the weight of countless dark stories. Even someone of her considerable spiritual training couldn't fully shake the chill that crept up her spine. After all, Kyoto's history was woven with broken pacts and vengeful yokai. Striking out on her own here would be nothing short of suicide. A deep, resonant voice cut through the tense silence. "You're strong, exceptionally strong. Be mine." Before them stood a towering red demon, his skin glowing like smoldering coals. Two curved horns jutted from his brow, marking him as one of the fearsome Red Clan. He was clad in polished samurai armor, each plate perfectly forged, reflecting icy light in stark contrast to the ragged, unarmored fiends milling at his feet. In his massive hands he bore an enormous blade, nearly twice the length of Saiko Busujima's katana, and as unwieldy as it was lethal, clearly forged to match his tremendous frame. Saiko said nothing. She simply tightened her grip on her sword's hilt. A palpable wave of killing intent radiated from her, like a sharpened edge slicing the air. Everyone present felt their hearts pound under the weight of her silent threat. "Ha! I live for this killing intent!" The Scarlet Phantom's laughter rang out, charged with the exhilaration of battle and genuine respect for a worthy opponent. He wasn't like those mindless spirits that swarm their prey with sheer numbers. He hungered for a true test of strength. At the sight of him, Shizuka Hiratsuka's fists trembled. In a low voice, she warned Saiko Busujima, "Be careful. This red ghost is dangerous." Shinichiro Busujima stepped forward beside her. Saiko, he said, "no matter how powerful our enemy seems, keep your head. Look for every opening, calmly exploit his weaknesses, and you'll prevail." All attention on the battlefield snapped to Saiko as the Scarlet Phantom shifted his weight. In an instant, he charged, unstoppable as a wild stallion freed from its reins. His gleaming blade traced a deadly arc through the air, aimed straight for Saiko's vital organs. Tension crackled like a drawn bowstring, and in that single heartbeat, the clash of their wills was about to erupt. Ethan Dokushima faced the demon's sudden onslaught without flinching. He twisted aside in a heartbeat, narrowly avoiding the monster's crimson blade, then drove his own samurai sword into its flank with blinding speed. Yet the red demon was equally formidable. With the lithe grace of a great cat, it twisted its massive form and slipped out of Ethan's strike. In the same motion, its wild sword traced a vicious arc through the air, trailing a milky white shockwave, the unmistakable sign of a blade breaking the sound barrier. Everything within a meter of its path lost cohesion and turned to ash. The demon pivoted, its sword descending in a world-shattering slash. Time itself seemed to freeze, and the air grew unbearably heavy with tension. Then, at the last possible instant, a second figure burst into view. Shinichiro Dokushima sprang to Ethan's side, a long sword crackling with lightning in his grip. His spirit energy coiled around the blade like thunder waiting to be unleashed. Together, the two warriors braced for the next decisive clash. Ethan vanished in a flash of lightning and drove his blade straight at the crimson demon. A sharp ring of metal on metal echoed as Ethan's sword met the demon's massive greatsword, sparks spraying in every direction. But in the next instant, the demon's iron-hard hand clamped around Ethan's blade. No matter how fiercely he channeled his thunder spirit power, he couldn't pry its grip loose. Bolts of lightning danced across the demon's palm, slicing Ethan's flesh until blood dripped from his fingertips. Yet the demon only grinned, unbothered. "Not bad," it said in a voice like grinding stone, but far too weak. With brutal swiftness, the demon shifted weight behind its sword and struck. Its 2-meter-tall frame lunged forward like a living avalanche, the sole of its boot catching Ethan square in the chest. The impact was overwhelming. He soared backward as if he'd been cut free, skidding through the air before crashing to the ground. "Master!" came the anguished cry from the 10 Busujima family spiritualists gathered nearby. Their hearts leapt into their throats as they rushed forward, faces pale with fear. They sprang forward without hesitation and caught Busujima Shinichiro before he could fall again, keeping the older man from sustaining any worse injury. The instant Psycho laid eyes on her wounded father, murderous intent ignited in her gaze. She drew in a steady breath, and the golden aura of her spirit flared to life, blinding as sunlight, shrouding her from head to toe. In that moment, her samurai blade seemed to hum with its own vitality. The steel glowed molten gold, sending shafts of brilliance across the clearing. With a roar like a lioness roused to protect her cub, Psycho lunged at the red ghost. Steel rang out, time and again, as sword met sword. Clang, clang, clang! Each savage strike sent concentric ripples of spiritual energy radiating through the air. On the other side, the red ghost, wielding his massive nodachi in one gauntleted hand, parried and riposted with brutal finesse. Every collision unleashed shockwaves powerful enough to shatter eardrums or worse. Any ordinary bystander, drawn even a step too close, would be reduced to unconsciousness, if not fragments of bone and gray matter. But amid the maelstrom, Shizuka Hiratsuka saw her opening, and she was not one to hesitate. Ethan felt a surge of thunderous spiritual power course through him, sharpening every nerve and speeding his reflexes. In that heightened state, he spotted the exact instant when Seiko Busujima's nodachi clashed with her blade. Seizing the tiniest opening in that split second, Shizuka Hiratsuka lunged forward and unleashed a crushing punch. Chapter 166, Golden Spirit Force Form 1, Iron Splitting Technique, Type Swan, Iron Severing. In the instant when Chione staggered off balance, he had no way to mount a counterattack. His only hope lay in his free arm. Seizing the opportunity, Shizuka Hiratsuka struck. Akari's attention was glued to the spot where his nodachi met the demon's blade, and in that split second, Shizuka's fist thundered forward like a bolt of lightning, tearing through a midnight sky, smashing squarely into Chione's flank. But Akari's reflexes surpassed all expectations. With his other hand, he summoned a mountain's worth of force, and his massive fist shot out to intercept Hiratsuka's blow in midair. Boom! The collision was cataclysmic. Shizuka's thunder-charged punch slammed into Akari's hulking fist with a blinding flash and an ear-splitting roar. The very air around them seemed to rip apart, winds spiraling into visible whirlpools. Despite Shizuka Hiratsuka's formidable strength, she was hopelessly outmatched by Akari's near-superhuman power. Struck by the sheer force of the blow, Hiratsuka Shizu felt herself lifted like a leaf in a gale, her body tracing a graceful arc through the air before slamming hard into the ground. Pain flared across her chest as ribs rattled against one another, but she bit back any sound of agony. The fight was far from over. Chi Guai fared better. Though the impact rocked him, he righted himself in an instant, as steady and unyielding as a mountain, yet that split-second wobble was enough to seal his fate. Perfect opening. Busujima Saiko's voice cut through the clamor. Her hawk-sharp eyes had spotted Aki's momentary lapse. A true swordsman knows that chances vanish in the blink of an eye, strike or lose them forever. In the next heartbeat, Saiko's movements became a blur. With a single fluid motion, she slid her longsword back into its scabbard, as if the blade were an extension of her own arm. The air around her seemed to hum with power as she called upon the golden spirit technique, slash iron. The world narrowed to the steel at her hip and the split-second opening before her. And then she was gone, her strike whistling toward its mark. Seiko Busujima's demonstration of Ai, the art of drawing the sword, is breathtaking in its simplicity and precision. There are no flashy flourishes or needless theatrics in her movement, only a razor-sharp focus on the blade's purpose, to strike. In Ei, the moment you draw your sword, you must cut. If you hesitate, you fail. That single-minded pursuit of victory, the ability to perceive and seize an instant of opportunity while poised in stillness, is Ei's true essence. Unfortunately, many people misunderstand the term. They assume jutsu refers to drawing the blade and Ai to sheathing it, imagining Ai as nothing more than a draw-cut-resheath sequence. In fact, those syllables originally served as mutual descriptors for the same action, not separate phases. Ancient Japanese traditions even called it by other names: jukaisho, draw and cut, hikitsuke, pull together, or suari tori, seated draw. Yet all these variants point back to one fundamental idea: perfect readiness to strike in the singular, decisive moment. Ethan's Iaido strike is designed to kill with a single, lightning-fast arc. Every ounce of his Badao Shu training funnels into that one blow. If it misses, the consequences are devastating. In the fleeting instant between thunder and spark, his opponent has almost no time to block or counterattack. Even the most extraordinary reflexes and agility can only delay the counterstrike. Mounting a second assault is virtually impossible once the blade is unleashed. Swiftly sheathing the sword is equally treacherous. The moment Ethan pours every drop of his strength into the draw, his body and spirit feel hollowed out, forced to stand by and await fate's verdict. The essence of this art lies in 3 inseparable steps: drawing the blade, delivering the edge, and resheathing. In Iaido, the draw itself is life. Ethan watched in awe as Seiko Busujima formed her draw. At first, the blade slid from the scabbard in a deliberate, almost languid pace. Then, mid-motion, it suddenly accelerated, and just as the tip cleared the mouth of the sheath, it whipped across in a razor-sharp horizontal slash, like a sudden gale cutting through still air. This was the essence of the 3-phase draw: initiation, release, and execution, designed to seize the slightest opening in an opponent's defense and end the fight with a single, merciless strike. The moment her sword sprang free, it seemed to resonate with the very air around it, emitting a low, vibrating hum. Speed and power fused so flawlessly that only a true master swordsman could appreciate the sensation. That humming you heard was the blade slicing through the atmosphere, each note charged with lethal intent. Seiko stood utterly still, her graceful form and steely eyes as cold and unyielding as winter frost, capable of freezing the warmth of life itself. Ethan absorbed every detail of her movement. Is this Iai? The thought pulsed through him. As a scion of the Ghost Clan, Ethan recognized the signature draw technique at once. Yet he also knew that Seiko's Nodachi, long and weighty, was hardly suited to pure Iai. If not a standard Iai strike, then what extraordinary skill was she truly unveiling? He'd lost his balance, and in a duel at its peak, losing your footing can mean death. Yet in that instant, the Red Demon's forearm muscles snapped taut like overstretched springs. With a sudden twist of the wrist, he began to parry Seiko Busujima's Nodachi, blade smashing against blade in a battle of wills. Crack! The impact rang out like thunder, as if the very air was torn apart by the sheer force of the collision. In that blinding flash, their forms seemed to dissolve, leaving only 2 streaks of silver and red light locked in a lethal dance. Then, with a deft flick of her wrist, Seiko's sword found its mark. She drove through the Red Demon's Nodachi in one smooth, devastating arc, splitting it cleanly in 2. The shattered pieces clattered to the ground, and the Red Demon himself collapsed, his strength spent. Seiko Busujima withdrew her blade, chest heaving with exertion. She lowered the weapon and whispered its name in awe. Zan Tai. This was her own creation, a sword of unparalleled craftsmanship that demanded absolute precision and spiritual focus to wield. And today, it had proven its worth. Seiko Busujima drew in a steady breath and funneled every ounce of her spiritual energy into the blade. This was only the first step of her Zan Tai technique. Next came the real challenge. She had to refine that power further, compressing it until it was locked into the razor-thin sheath of air formed by the sword's swift arc. Any stray energy slipping along the blade's length would be wasted, so she concentrated every last surge into the precise point of contact. By maximizing the blade's energy density, she ensured that, the moment it struck, an immense destructive force would erupt. This is the secret of her iron-cutting style, an unbreakable edge capable of cleaving its target in 2 with a single, devastating stroke. Chapter 1167, Clash of Powers. Zezi, you're astonishing. Kasumigaoka Shiyu stepped back, eyes shining with both admiration and helplessness. Even her Gale dog, her most trusted companion, seemed powerless before the Ghost Clan's might, let alone capable of joining in this peak-level battle. The beast's hooves scraped at the earth in agitation, mirroring its master's frustration. Nearby, Busujima Shinichiro watched his daughter, Seiko, with quiet pride. Every movement of her sword spoke of a profound and singular mastery over spiritual energy. Her blade was not merely an outpouring of force, it was the distillation of pure spirit, each strand of power woven into the blade's luminous arc. One strike from her was enough to found a new sect. A twinge of envy tugged at Shinichiro's heart. He had awakened his own spiritual power years ago and mastered rare cultivation techniques, focusing on refining the very nature of spirit to attain purity and strength. Yet in Seiko's display, he recognized a talent far surpassing his own. Seiko had already discovered her own way of wielding spiritual power, refining it into unique techniques all her own. Even her father, Shinichiro, couldn't help but beam with pride at her progress. In the end, these moves and skills were simply methods of channeling energy more efficiently, and Seiko had mastered them faster than anyone expected. With a graceful twist, she turned her foe's strength against him and shattered the form of the Red Spectre in a single decisive strike. "Father, are you all right?" Seiko asked the moment the swirling ghosts and goblins around them dissolved into mist. She spun on her heel, concern shining in her eyes. Shinichiro straightened, brushing a lock of silver hair from his brow. He gave her a reassuring nod and a wry smile. "I'm fine." Chigui's kick had been fierce, but his spiritual barrier absorbed most of the impact. An ordinary man would never have survived it. Kyoto at night felt strange and half-remembered, as if the city itself hovered between two worlds. Phantoms drifted along lantern-lit alleyways, while classical yokai, goblins with twisted horns, stealthy bakaniko, hulking minotaurs, slipped from shadow to shadow. And tonight, for Seiko and her father, the boundary between the living and the dead had never felt thinner. These goblins are familiar foes from the old realms of Disconnected City and Weak Warrior, and here they've proven every bit as dangerous. When the horn sounded across the island nation, most citizens barely blinked. They'd already faced these creatures during the Tokyo onslaught and knew exactly what they were up against. At first glance, an ordinary goblin seems unimpressive, short, squat, and wielding a crude mace. Yet they're deceptively strong, moving in packs to overwhelm any defender. More fearsome still are the stone throwers, whose massive bamboo baskets brim with rocks that transform into jagged bolts mid-flight, piercing even the sturdiest armor without effort. Worse yet are the elemental variants. Fire goblins hurl blazing spheres that reduce wood and flesh to cinders. Frost goblins summon shards of ice so cold they freeze victims solid in an instant. Against such foes, a gleaming sword does little more than chip away at their hide. Only firearms reliably end the threat. For unarmed civilians, an encounter with these goblins can quickly become a death sentence. Even the island's psychics and demon power users find themselves hard-pressed to fend them off when they surge in overwhelming numbers. Ethan leaned over the flickering candlelight, eyes tracing the crude sketches in the battered field guide. Each page detailed the world's most dangerous creatures, and his survival depended on knowing them inside out. First came the Thunder Goblin. Unlike its lesser kin, this hulking brute could summon crackling lightning from thin air, unleashing electric strikes so blisteringly fast that few defenders could react in time. Even seasoned psychics and demon-touched warriors, accustomed to withstanding supernatural forces, found them, elves staggering under a direct bolt. One hit could cripple their powers, or worse, leave them unconscious before they knew what struck them. Next was the Cat Demon, a predator born for stealth and sudden violence. Their lithe, muscular bodies moved with unnatural speed. 1 second they'd be 20 feet away, the next they'd pounce, claws bared. Most humans fell to their razor-sharp talons before they even realized they were in danger. Even fighters blessed with psychic foresight or demon-gifted endurance had to keep their guard raised at all times. Among their ranks lurked a darker breed, the Venomclaw Cat Demon. A single scratch from those poisoned claws could paralyze a hero's will to fight, leaving even the strongest mind reeling in agony. Finally came the Tauren, towering, horned warriors whose brute strength and unyielding shields made them nearly unstoppable on the battlefield. While ordinary Tauren were formidable enough on their own, the rare white Tauren stood unmatched. Legend said they mastered a sacred shield technique, an ethereal barrier that could absorb and redirect any attack. Few enemies had ever managed to break through one of those shields intact. Ethan closed the guide with a soft snap, Armed with this knowledge, he hoped to keep one step ahead of these lethal foes. In this world, ignorance wasn't just dangerous, it was fatal. Ethan pressed himself against the cracked stone of a ruined shrine, sweat and ash coating his uniform as the night air trembled with distant roars. All around him, Kyoto had become a slaughterhouse. Demons poured from broken sewers and collapsed temples, dragging the unlucky into darkness where hungry jaws snapped. Ghosts drifted through the streets, latching onto the living, and neither exorcists nor warlocks could banish them. Many had already died screaming. Across the square, the Tauran warriors formed a loose circle, their invisible barrier shimmering faintly in the torchlight. Rumor said that no blade or spell could pierce it, but that barrier did nothing to slow the demons that danced among the ruins, feasting on anyone caught outside its glow. Ethan's heart pounded as he swallowed bile. This was no backup line, it was a last stand. A crackle came through his headset. Sergeant Kane's voice wavered with fear. "Ethan, we can't hold here. Fall back, now." Ethan met Kane's eyes. They were wide with desperation, every muscle in his body screaming for retreat. But the moment Kane spun to run, a single rifle shot shattered the night. The bullet struck Kane in the temple. His body jerked once, then went limp, collapsing into a widening pool of blood. The sergeant's scream cut off abruptly, and for a heartbeat the world froze around Ethan. From a roof high above the square, a harsh voice crackled over a loudspeaker. "Anyone who dares to flee will be shot where they stand." Ethan looked up to see Commander Gao Longyan silhouetted against the wreckage. His cold eyes swept the battlefield, as precise and unyielding as a sniper's scope. Ethan realized, with a sickening clarity, that Gao Longyan had anticipated their panic. He'd hidden marksmen in the darkness, ready to pick off every deserter. Ethan forced himself to breathe. He wiped ash from his cheek and tightened his grip on his rifle. There was no choice now but to move forward, into the nightmare of demons, ghosts, and the merciless order from above. And so, steeling his nerves, he slipped away from the broken shrine and into the heart of the chaos. These snipers aren't using standard rifles. They're armed with specialized anti-material sniper rifles. Since demons and ghosts appeared, humanity's conventional weapons have been pushed to their limits. Firearms, once optimized for human combat, now prove woefully inadequate against these otherworldly foes. In the past, designers focused on efficiency. A weapon only had to drop a human target, so they scaled back both propellant charges and calibers. Confronted with demons and spirits, however, that approach has been completely overturned. Militaries now must reevaluate our arsenals and develop arms purpose-built to confront supernatural threats. As a result, full-power rounds and large-caliber guns, relics of the World War II era, have been revived. Where once human physiology could not absorb their brutal recoil, today's spirit-augmented soldiers unleash their devastating force with unprecedented precision. A prime example is the Barrett XM109 sniper rifle, a modern masterpiece whose true power emerges only in the hands of a trained spiritualist. Ethan leaned forward, absorbing every word of the technical briefing. The new XM1 round was nothing short of revolutionary. Its 25mm projectile had an effective range of 2,000 meters and could penetrate up to 50 millimeters of armored steel. On impact, it produced an explosive blast comparable to that of light artillery, obliterating its target far more efficiently than older ammunition. In fact, when stacked against the standard 12.7mm armor-piercing round, the XM1 was at least 2.5 times more powerful. Chapter 1168, New Magic Rifle and Dragon Bullet. Ethan crouched behind a shattered stone pillar, the new magic sniper rifle cradled in his arms. Its barrel was etched with glowing runes that promised unparalleled power, but with great power came brutal recoil. A single shot could hurl an ordinary marksman backward like a rag doll. Today, though, such concerns were moot. Ethan and his fellow spirit users, now demon-bane sharpshooters, had fused their bodies and souls to withstand that savage kick as if it were nothing more than a gust of wind. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared, its echo rolling across the battlefield, and the bolt of arcane energy it fired, a dragon bullet, glowing with iridescent fire, tore through the nearest demon's armor as though it were paper. Behind him, every spirit shooter unleashed synchronized volleys. Each shot struck with surgical precision, cutting down anyone foolish enough to flee. The sight was brutal and effective. Deserters dropped in their tracks, their hopes of escape crushed by unerring marksmanship. That grim spectacle sent a wave of resolve through the remaining troops. Doubts and desertion vanished. Now every rifle was leveled at the demonic horde, not at their own people. Elsewhere on the ravaged field, Kuroki Gensai, Kano-ka, and Wakatsuki Samurai waged a very different battle. No guns, no tactics, only steel on steel, each warrior testing the limits of his power, desperate to prove his worth through raw, unrelenting combat. Reloading with practiced speed, Ethan's gaze never wavered from the enemy lines. With this new magic rifle in hand and the might of the dragon bullet ready to unleash, he felt the tide of battle shift in their favor. The only question that remained was how far this weapon could carry them, and what new horrors lay waiting once its power was spent. They had long since stopped fearing life or death. In this world where spiritual power and demonic force were in constant flux, only by shattering one's own limits could anyone hope to survive the chaos. Ethan locked eyes with the beast and struck. The impact rattled his left arm so violently that his hand went limp at his side, his fingers grotesquely twisted, his forearm glowing bright red as if seared by an inner blaze, heat pulsating from his skin. Across from him, the lion-wolf demon howled in agony. Ethan's spirit spear had driven clean through its right shoulder, and at the wound's edge, spiritual energy and demonic taint churned together in writhing vortices, sapping the creature's strength. "Damn you, human!" It roared, a thunderous bellow that carried pain and fury in equal measure. With tortured determination, the demon hauled itself to its full height. Each of its massive steps sent tremors through the ground, as if a living mountain were shifting in the night. Under the pale moonlight, its twisted features, a savage blend of lion's mane and lupine snarl, looked even more hideous. Every muscle quivered with pain and primal rage, a brutal testament to the terrible power they both wielded. Ethan braced himself, every nerve alight. In this war of spirits and fiends, hesitation was the only true death sentence, and he had no intention of yielding. The demon's eyes flared with a bloodthirsty crimson light, like twin stars burning in an endless void, ready to swallow the world in darkness. A cruel, mocking smile curled at the corner of its maw, ridiculing the helplessness of all things. It flexed its injured arm, and with each movement came the sickening grind of bone against bone. Pain lanced through its body, but its thirst for blood raged hotter still, stripping away any shred of reason and leaving only raw, desperate fury. Its breathing grew ragged and rapid, every exhalation a savage announcement of the threat it posed. "I'm gonna rip your throat out!" With a bestial roar, the demon threw back its head, revealing rows of jagged fangs dripping with demonic ichor that glowed like embers. The surrounding air seemed to warp and crack under its presence, as if reality itself were being torn apart. Then, with the unstoppable force of a wild stallion, it lunged forward, a blur of sinew and speed, straight at Kuroki Gensai. Ethan pressed through the searing agony in his left hand, forcing his damaged muscles to clench into a fist. The bones and tendons had been warped long ago in a brutal skirmish, yet he refused to yield. This was who he'd chosen to become, an ascetic of spiritual power, charting his own course beyond the accepted teachings of any single school. Day after day, year after year, Ethan returned to the same grueling regimen. He honed the peculiar wrist flow technique he'd invented, then drilled the foundational forms he'd scavenged from every martial tradition he could find. Straw rolls took his knuckles first, sandbags thudded against his palms and forearms next, and finally, the infamous iron sand palm, where he pummeled a mortar of metal filings until his hands could crush stone. What looked like simple, repetitive drills became a torrent of raw destruction at his fingertips. Each session tested both body and mind to their limits. Endless cycles of break and rebuild left his muscles sinewy and unbreakable. His bones, under relentless impact, grew as tough as forged steel. Countless times he broke, countless times he rebuilt, and each time he emerged stronger. At last, after tolerating pain beyond imagination, the fruits of his obsession appeared. When Ethan struck or defended now, his arms and fists moved with the speed and thunder of a cannon. His very limbs had become weapons, razor-sharp, unstoppable. Thus was born his signature magic gun technique. a living testament to unyielding will and the perfection born of suffering. Ethan Kuroki understood that a true warrior didn't rely on dazzling combinations. One perfected technique could decide a battle. He devoted every ounce of his energy to honing his magic fist, tirelessly refining each movement until at last he awakened his latent spiritual power. In that moment, he fused his spirit with the magic fist, creating a new, unstoppable force capable of piercing steel. Now, face to face with a ravenous demon, Ethan felt neither fear nor hesitation. He drew in a steady breath, channeling all his spiritual energy into his right hand. Within an instant, his palm became wreathed in a scorching, radiant glow. "Magic fist!" he roared. With a single, explosive thrust, his 5 fingers shot forward like the barrel of a gun. The demon's roar was cut short as Ethan's blow tore through its armored hide, sending shards of dark flesh and talon-sized claws clattering across the cracked pavement. Not far away, Ghana fought with equal desperation. Flames danced along her sword as she parried grotesque limbs and cleaved through lesser fiends that swarmed around her. Sweat and blood matted her hair, but her eyes burned with unyielding resolve. When the echoes of their assaults finally subsided, the battlefield lay strewn with the fallen remains of monsters. Tokyo's skyline, once a symbol of humanity's resilience, now smoldered in ruin. In the wake of the disaster, the Kengankai Guild, once hailed as Japan's premier monster-hunting order, had been reduced to little more than a ceremonial title. Yet even as the world seemed to crumble, Ethan and Ghana remained standing, proof that hope could still ignite in the darkest of times. Together, they would carry the fight forward, determined to reclaim their shattered city from the forces of darkness. Major corporations across Kengankai and economists from the island nation and around the world are riveted by the rise of superhumans and the looming economic fallout of demons and monsters, but Ethan pays it no mind. He has only one guiding principle: to repay Katara Meadows' kindness and seize his place in this new era. He must constantly test and surpass himself. So he willingly renounced the title of Meadows Fang and threw himself into the crucible of life-or-death duels. Through countless battles, Ethan honed a signature technique he calls the Dragon Bullet. By channeling his spirit energy into a single, explosive strike with virtually no wind-up, barely more than an inch of movement, he unleashes a blow faster than the eye can follow. As a mere mortal, he could already match the destructive force of a hurled javelin. Now, fully awakened to his spiritual power, his Dragon Bullet can blast clean through a 100mm steel plate at point-blank range. Ethan faced an opponent whose strength matched his own. He narrowed his eyes, every muscle coiling like a cheetah ready to spring. Drawing in a deep breath, he focused all his spiritual energy into his right fist. Almost at once, his hand became enveloped in a crystalline glow, as if carved from pure light. Then Ethan struck. A blast of chi and gusting air roared outward at lightning speed, smashing into the monster and hurling it dozens of meters back. Where his blow landed, the creature's hide split apart, leaving a jagged hole as if a cannonball had torn right through it. Chapter 1169, Explosive Punch. Ethan faced off against a creature no one could identify. Jagged bone spurs and thorn-like protrusions marred its sickly dark green hide, giving it an almost grotesque silhouette. Even with Ethan's body fortified by demonic power, the monster's presence pressed down on him like an immovable weight. His superhuman syndrome, amplifying his muscle fiber density 52 times, had made him one of the strongest men alive. Yet now, up against this abomination, that legendary strength felt perilously insufficient. With a bestial roar, the creature lunged as if it could rend steel, its clawed hand aimed straight for Ethan's heart. But years of martial training had sharpened Ethan's reflexes into a razor's edge. In a heartbeat, he slipped sideways with inhuman agility, and in the same fluid motion, caught the monster's wrist. Leaning into the principle of leverage, he diverted the strike harmlessly to one side. A sharp whistle split the air, the sound of raw force slicing through space, and the ground beneath them shuddered from the redirected power. Ethan steadied himself, every nerve alert, ready for the next thunderous assault. Blood beaded on Ethan's bare skin from the sheer force of the last strike. Pain seared along his nerves, a brutal reminder of what this battle had cost him so far. But the true punishment arrived the instant the monster's thorn-crusted flanks slammed into his guard like a living battering ram. Ribs groaned under the impact, muscles tore, and he felt his very bones threatening to buckle. Every cell in his body cried out, that unfamiliar soul-deep weakness that told him he was skating on the edge of collapse. Yet even as pain radiated through him, Ethan's heart thundered with exhilaration. This was what real war felt like. No fancy maneuvers, no second chances, just raw, unforgiving force. A fierce, almost arrogant grin curved his lips. Only by pushing himself to the brink could he tap into the purest joy of combat. He drew in a ragged breath, summoned every ounce of willpower, and let out a feral roar. In that instant, Ethan activated his secret technique, Explosive Core. His muscles ignited from within, power detonating through his frame, doubling his strength in a flash. The ground beneath him trembled as he prepared to strike back with everything he had left. Ethan felt every fiber of his body cry out in protest, but he knew this brutal struggle was his only chance to turn the tide. His forearms bulged like forged steel as he clamped down on the monster's twisted arm, fingers sinking into sinew and scales. At the same time, his legs, coiled like living vines, slithered up and locked around its neck, ready to throttle life from the beast. All along its back, jagged dorsal fins sliced into Ethan's thighs with each writhing movement, carving wounds that bared bone and sent hot streams of blood staining his uniform crimson. The acrid tang of iron filled the air, yet Ethan tasted nothing but resolve. Pain had become a distant echo. In its place burned the bright fire of victory. He moved with calculated precision, feeling out the creature's shifting weight and anticipating its next lunge. Every flex and twitch of its massive form told him where to apply pressure, where to wrench a joint just far enough to unbalance it. Inch by inch, he chipped away at its strength, locking a shoulder here, disrupting a tendon's pull there, until the creature's powerful muscles began to betray it. This was more than a clash of brute force. It was a battle of wills. With each carefully measured hold, Ethan sapped the monster's support, turning its own bulk into a liability. He let the beast struggle beneath him, waiting for that final moment when all its defenses would collapse, and all that would remain was Ethan's hand closing around its throat. Ethan felt a surge of emotion unlike anything he'd ever known. Is this what those who faced him before me went through? He wondered, tightening his grip on his weapon and pressing the attack with renewed ferocity. Striking the creature was like trying to wrestle a runaway locomotive. Every core muscle in his body screamed under the strain, as if it might tear itself apart. Each collision sent a jarring tremor through his bones, making him feel as though he might be ripped in two. Deep in his joints and tendons, dull thuds echoed like ancient war drums, warning that he was pushing himself beyond all limits. Whenever the monster swung its massive arms, the air around them quivered violently. Visible shockwaves rippled outward, tearing the atmosphere with sharp, whistling cracks. Any ordinary creature caught in their path would be pulverized in an instant, but Ethan refused to yield. As the ground shook beneath their blows, he steeled himself for the next bone-shaking impact. I've overcome tougher foes before. There's no way I'm losing now. Ethan's resolve burned like a torch, cutting through the surrounding darkness. Bracing himself, he seized one of the monster's colossal arms and began to twist. For a heartbeat, the air seemed to solidify as their raw strength clashed, like two steel girders bending against each other, metal screeching in protest. Then came a sharp, bone-cracking snap. The creature howled, its massive form shuddering as the severed limb fell away, echoing across the ruined courtyard. But the beast wasn't finished. With its remaining arm poised like a warhammer, it brought it down in a savage arc, the wind whistling in its wake. In a flash, Ethan dove aside, his samurai training guiding him. He adjusted his footing, spotted the monster's stagger, and propelled himself forward like an arrow, ready to strike while his enemy was off balance. Ethan's boot drove into the monster's midsection, and the recoil sent the creature hurtling across the ground. Its massive form tumbled end over end before skidding to a stop. It tried to push itself up, but its movements were sluggish. Clearly, it was badly wounded. In the space of a heartbeat, Ethan was behind it, fists clenched, and every muscle coiled with purpose. He poured all his anger and resolve into this moment. his arms drawing back like twin meteors. The very air cracked as his fists rocketed forward, aiming straight for the beast's spine. With a thunderous crack, the earth itself seemed to shudder. The monster's back caved inward under the blow, and it bellowed in agony, its limbs flailing uselessly. It had lost the will and the strength to fight. "Time to finish this," Ethan growled. "Destroy its core." He unleashed his final strike with the force of a tightly wound spring exploding, an impact laced with demonic energy more devastating than any tank shell or anti-tank missile. In that instant, Ethan's punch struck true, shattering the monster's heart and ending its reign of terror once and for all. Ethan's fist tore through the air, ripping it open like a jagged crack that surged toward the monster. Boom! The ground shuddered violently and split apart, as though heaven and earth themselves recoiled from the force of his blow. Chapter 1170, The Behemoth in the Lair. Ethan's fist connected with a bone-shattering crack. The behemoth's enormous body exploded like a ruptured dam, its skull crushed into pulp by his blow, then scattered by the shockwave into drifting fragments of bone and dust. He let his fist fall back to his side. His hands were perfectly clean, not a drop of blood or gore clinging to his skin, as though the ferocious clash had been nothing more than a dream. And yet, he could feel it, an exhilarating surge deep within. "I'm getting stronger," he whispered to himself. "My demon power. It's growing. It's as if I've drawn something from that monster's destruction." Ethan closed his eyes and drew in a steady breath, tuning his senses to the unfamiliar energy humming through his veins. It buzzed with a living vitality, like stolen life force harvested from the creature's corpse, or some stranger, more arcane substance altogether. He realized now that each monster he killed fueled his power far more quickly and directly than all the grueling physical training he'd endured before. This was a new threshold, one he intended to surpass with every hunt. Ethan felt a quiet surge of confidence as he and the other martial artists exchanged knowing glances. Each had just undergone a striking revelation, and none would doubt their chosen paths again. But there was no time to bask in the moment. Without warning, a fierce tremor rolled through Kyoto, rattling buildings to their foundations and rippling deep beneath the island itself. The quake seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the earth itself were convulsing, and the roar it unleashed left onlookers frozen with fear. Within seconds, seismic monitoring stations in Japan and the United States lit up with activity. Analysts pored over the data and stared in disbelief. Multiple epicenters clustered around the Kyoto region, each more than a kilometer beneath the surface. Nothing like this had ever been recorded before. Whispers rippled through the emergency centers. Was this merely an unprecedented natural disaster or something far more ominous? On the back of an armored evacuation vehicle, General Gao Zilongyan, commander of all forces in the Kyoto area, studied the latest readings on his handheld console. His brow was furrowed, his jaw clenched. The quake had struck with shocking force, and its magnitude far exceeded any forecast. "The intensity is still climbing," a young technician shouted, voice tight with urgency. All eyes turned back to the monitors, hearts pounding as the ground beneath them continued to tremble. A tremor crept into the technician's voice as he relayed the news, visibly shaken by the sudden crisis. At the current upgrade rate, 1/3 of Kyoto could collapse. Another engineer spoke up, urgency thick in his tone, as though reminding everyone that time was slipping away and disaster was closing in. Across the command center, Takazawa Longyan's pupils snapped wide as he stared at the report in disbelief. How could this happen? Every deployment, every contingency plan, even the lives of their soldiers, felt utterly fragile in the face of an earthquake this severe. "Damn it!" Longyan slammed his fist on the edge of the command desk. "Has that giant monster revived? Has it risen from the Earth's depths to shake all of Kyoto?" Rage and frustration trembled in his voice, but no amount of fury could alter the stark reality before him. Ethan's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel, the car bucking violently across the fractured pavement. Behind them, the defensive barricades they'd spent weeks building lay in splinters, and the soldiers who'd held the line, his comrades in arms, were already pulling back, their faces pale with the realization that no fortification could withstand this devastation. Even the fiercest warriors, still battling monsters and demons in their wake, had no choice but to flee. The quake intensified. All around them, Kyoto's storied skyline unraveled. Once proud buildings teetered, then collapsed in clouds of dust and concrete. Streets that had teemed with life only hours before were now littered with twisted rebar and crumbling masonry. Acrid smoke curled through the air, carrying the stench of burning wood and scorched metal. Civilians poured into the streets in a panicked stampede, desperately seeking any path to safety. Above the chaos, the sky glowed a hellish red. Plumes of ash drifted like ghostly sails against the inferno-bright horizon. Every collapsing tower sent curtains of rubble billowing skyward, as though Kyoto itself were exhaling its last breath. Then, the earth split open. From the jagged fissure emerged a creature of unimaginable scale, its colossal body stretching unintermittently from head to tail, covering nearly 1/3 of the city's ruined expanse. Ethan froze, heart pounding, as the behemoth rose into the smoke-choked air and unleashed a deafening roar that seemed to shake what remained of the world. Ethan's heart pounded as he stared at the towering behemoth before him. Kyoto, sprawling across some 827.9 square kilometers, had never seemed so small. The creature's flesh appeared hewn from jagged stone and packed earth, its skin like a living wall of rock. Ethan could barely believe his eyes. Around him, people recoiled in horror and disbelief. "How can we possibly fight something this enormous?" someone gasped. Fear twisted their faces, courage evaporated in an instant. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble in sympathy, and back they stepped, desperate to put as much distance between themselves and the monster as they could. Just when it seemed they might escape the worst, the giant's body began to writhe. From fissures in its rocky hide swarmed dozens of smaller creatures, each more nightmarish than the last. Some buzzed overhead, while others skittered across the earth with alarming speed. At the first glimpse of human flesh, or demon, or monster, they pounced without hesitation. The flyers were grotesque hybrids of insect and pterosaur. Broad, powerful wings bore them up into the sky, where they hovered like living daggers on the wind. Their forelimbs ended in razor-sharp talons capable of piercing armor and bone alike. On the ground, squat, armored beasts lumbered forward. Their thick carapaces bristled with wicked thorns, and each step they took gouged the earth. Ethan forced himself to breathe, to think. He drew a shaky breath and tightened his grip on his spear. Panic might have spread like wildfire, but if there was any hope of saving Kyoto, he had to stand firm. Around him, allies faltered, but Ethan planted his feet. He would not let this nightmare swarm consume them all. Above the chaos, the giant's rumble echoed through the streets. A challenge, a taunt. With a fierce cry, Ethan charged forward, determination flooding his veins. Whatever horrors the beast unleashed, Ethan would face them head-on. The city's fate rested on their shoulders now, and he would not let it fall. Though they lack the speed of their airborne cousins, these ground beasts more than make up for it with sheer force. They barrel across the earth, bulldozing obstacles with their armored shells. When they spot prey, they impale or crush it with wicked thorns, preferring a savage, beat-to-death onslaught. No known weapon can breach their carapaces. They do not eat or digest in any conventional sense. Instead, they haul captives back to the nest of the colossal mother creature. There, scores of tiny predators hatch and feed on the living host until they're ready to burst forth, even more fearsome than before. Soon, this new generation will pour into Kyoto City, spreading relentless havoc and unending misery. At the same time, Japan's self-defense force, now 200,000 strong, has roared to life like a vast war machine. Its rapid mobilization and immense scale have stunned the nation. At every major port, hundreds of warships stand ready, their steel decks bustling with sailors making last-minute preparations for the coming operation. Among the assembled warships were sleek state-of-the-art vessels and battle-scarred veterans that had seen better days. Though they differed in age and design, each one now bore the same crucial mission. Chapter 71, Bombing. Over 500 warplanes roared off from airbases across the region, carving brilliant contrails against the sky. Some skimmed just above the treetops. Others shot upward into the stratosphere, like falcons poised to strike. On the ground, hundreds of thousands of soldiers surged toward Kyoto in a coordinated advance. Tanks, armored personnel carriers and artillery vehicles pressing forward in a thunderous column of dust and steel. Across the Pacific, 2 American carrier strike groups had steamed into position. Their flight decks teemed with fighters, which launched one after another like eagles leaving the nest. Armed with the latest precision-guided munitions and fed by state-of-the-art navigation systems, these jets were primed to execute pinpoint strikes in the chaos of modern warfare. Above Kyoto, tension crackled in the air. Churning gray clouds rolled in, and a biting wind swept through the heights, as though nature itself recoiled from the impending onslaught. In that frozen expanse of sky and earth, every pilot and infantryman sensed the same deadly thrill. War was about to erupt on an unprecedented scale. Every aircraft and every missile had become a harbinger of death, but none more ominous than the colossal B-52 stratofortresses. These air fortresses loomed over the battlefield like titans, their cavernous bellies yawning open to reveal a devastating payload. One by one, the heavy bombs rolled forward, released with deadly precision. They plummeted through the sky like the wrath of some merciless god, hurtling toward the earthbound targets below. These bombs were more than mere metal and explosives. They were the executioners of untold lives. And despite their fearsome reputation, many of the B-52s in this operation were far from brand new. In a bid to marshal a massive air armada at a moment's notice, the United States had roused dozens of long-dormant airframes, veterans consigned to warehouse storage and slated for scrapping. Though the paint was chipped and streaked with age, their Cold War-era lines still spoke of raw power. Beneath every weathered fuselage lay the gritty history of countless missions, and a reminder that even old warriors can deliver ruin on a grand scale. Ethan tightened his grip on the throttles as the B-29's engines roared beneath him. Around him, the veteran crew, hardened by the night incendiary raid on Tokyo, dubbed LeMay's Baku, sat in grim silence. They had witnessed that inferno's cruelty and ruthlessness firsthand. Now, by cruel irony, they were ordered to turn their bombs on their own homeland. In each pilot's eyes burned a fierce resolve to see the mission through, and just beneath it, a fear that cut deeper than any enemy bullet. They told themselves this was for the greater good, that destroying key military targets would pave the way for peace. Yet every man knew the cost. If anything went wrong, the Americans had offered them the chance to bail out. But out here, over hostile territory, parachuting meant a near-certain death. There was no time for doubt. Ethan stole a final glance at his copilot, whose jaw was set so tightly it hurt to watch. Then, the bombardier nodded, and Ethan eased the bomb bay doors open. One by one, the payloads, high-explosive charges, and deadly cluster munitions slipped free. In that instant, the sky below ignited, a forest of trails streaking toward the earth. The horizon glowed like distant suns rising all at once. Ethan exhaled, bracing himself for the inevitable blast. The roar was deafening, a thunderclap that shook the B-29 to its frame. Through the smoky haze on his windshield, he watched the first detonations bloom across the city. With a heavy heart, he knew there was no turning back. They were committed now, to each other, to their country, and to the grim duty they had sworn to perform. Each cluster bomb carries more than 600 fist-sized submunitions, tiny seeds of destruction that, upon impact, instantly bloom into violent blossoms of death. Though each individual charge is less powerful than a conventional high-explosive shell, their sheer number and wide dispersal ensure catastrophic damage in seconds. Amid the thunder of incoming fire, Kyoto's ground forces sprang into action. Armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles rumbled forward toward their assigned targets, bristling with advanced weapon systems designed for every imaginable battlefield scenario. Then, at 2,000 meters above the earth, the first cluster detonated. It felt as if an invisible giant had ripped the sky apart. Even the hardest hearts quivered at the concussion. Moonlight was swallowed in an instant, replaced by a wash of searing flames and choking smoke that turned the night sky a hellish shade of crimson. Hundreds of glowing spheres, each several meters across, burst outward, harbingers of chaos raining down on the world below. They streaked across the night sky like the most dazzling stars, terrifyingly beautiful, making hearts pound. Each fireball carved a brilliant arc before bursting into countless sparks, like a shower of falling stars illuminating a war-torn heavens. Yet behind that beauty lay only death and ruin. Within the blast radius, nearly a kilometer of scorched air, predators fell like rain. Their wings burned away in the flames, their bodies torn apart by the shockwave. Boom, boom, boom. The explosions came without respite, each one rocking the earth as if the ground itself were tearing open. Every flash was a grim grin from the god of death. Golden waves of fireballs rolled across the sky, turning the city below into a churning sea of flame. Pillars of fire shot upward, smoke billowed in thick, choking columns, and all of Kyoto seemed hurled into purgatory. With every bomb that fell, a new death zone was born. In the blast zone, nothing, solid buildings, towering trees, or living creatures, was spared. Walls collapsed into heaping rubble. Branches and trunks charred into blackened stumps. Animals and people alike writhed in terror, powerless before fate's cruel verdict. Cluster munitions may lack the raw punch of strategic nukes, but their sheer coverage is staggering. Each bomblet is a little messenger of death, spinning through the sky before slamming into the earth in a blinding flash of destruction. One is enough to tear a person apart, precisely why international law bans them. To the U.S., however, such treaties are paper tigers, devoid of real force. In America's eyes, war isn't a matter of good or evil. It's a contest of victory and defeat. And when victory is the only goal that matters, no method is off limits. They show no concern for the innocent lives that might be lost in the blast, nor for the beautiful homes that could be consumed by the fires of war. To them, victory is everything. Every other cost is expendable. And those unexploded bombs, left buried amid the ruins, have become the greatest hidden threat in the aftermath of battle. Chapter 1172, Kyoto is gone. Below the surface, they lie hidden like time bombs buried in the earth, waiting silently for their next victim. Whether triggered by a gust of wind or the fall of a single raindrop, each explosion still unleashes devastating force. An unwary civilian could set one off at any moment and become another casualty. To the Americans, those lives are no more than a speck of dust. They pay no heed to the post-war cleanup. They leave it to the islanders to clear these remnants of conflict. They feel no guilt for the countless homes destroyed, no sorrow for the lives lost. For them, war is simply one more tool of statecraft, another means to secure global dominance. All around Ethan, formerly known as Luther, the city lies in ruins. Where Kyoto once stood bustling and proud, now only shattered walls remain. Flames still lick at twisted steel and crumbling masonry. The skyline is gone, replaced by choking smoke and the distant echo of crumbling concrete. He steps cautiously through ash and scattered debris, the acrid scent of burning wood heavy in the air. Every footfall risks another hidden charge waiting below. Yet Ethan knows he must press on. Somewhere in these ruins may lie survivors, men, women, even children, who still cling to hope amid the devastation. As the sun sinks behind a cloud of black smoke, Ethan lifts his gaze to what was once a landmark temple. All that remains is a fractured gatehouse, its Torii gate toppled and splintered. He inhales sharply, steeling himself. The cost of war is endless, and here in Kyoto, its price has finally been paid in full. Now, with dusk approaching, Ethan readies himself for the long night ahead. One more journey through a landscape scarred by those silent bombs, a mission born of duty and haunted by loss. Ethan pressed his back against a crumbling concrete wall and stared out at the ruined cityscape. The once towering skyscrapers lay in shattered heaps. The broad, sunlit avenues had become nothing more than pits and rubble. Where laughter and conversation once echoed through the streets, there was now only haunting silence, and a sense of despair so thick it felt alive. The air reeked of smoke and blood, the acrid stench of death and destruction making Ethan's stomach churn. In the distance, the nest beast, its underground lair undisturbed by the Allied bombing, belched forth new horrors. Winged predators carved arcs across the sky, while their crawling counterparts slithered among the wreckage below, each on the hunt for any survivors. Overhead, a squadron of Allied bombers cut through the gray clouds, their engines roaring like rolling thunder. They bore heavy explosives in their bellies, ready to unleash another blast of fiery devastation. But the flying predators were eerily nimble, more like swallows than monsters. They darted through the air in rapid, invisible beats of their wings, weaving and diving with uncanny precision. Each time a bomber released its deadly payload, the beasts twisted and rolled at the last possible moment, slipping away from the blast's impact zone as if guided by instinct. Watching them, Ethan felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his chest. The battle for this shattered city was far from over, and the true enemy had yet to be struck down. The sky trembled under the onslaught of the flying predators. Bloodthirst glinted in their eyes as they swooped toward the bomber formation, talons flashing like sharpened steel, eager to rend the armored hulls. Instantly, the bombers and their fighter escorts unleashed a withering hail of anti-aircraft fire, weaving a deadly lattice across the heavens. Yet the predators danced through every barrage with uncanny grace, tracing looping arcs that left shells crashing harmlessly behind them. For a moment, it seemed the human gunners might hold the line, until the predators executed a maneuver no one had anticipated. Several of the creatures pressed against one another in midair, their bodies pulsing with an otherworldly glow. Within seconds, they fused into a single, colossal entity, synthetic flying predator. Each beat of its vast wings sent shockwaves rippling through the air. Locked onto its target, a lone bomber, the synthing predator plunged in a staggering dive. The pilot screamed as the beast bore down, talons outstretched. There was only one explosive impact. The creature tore through the bomber's reinforced armor as if it were paper, shredding wing and fuselage in a spray of sparks and metal fragments. The bomber broke apart, plummeting toward the earth in a fiery arc. Below, the ground forces braced themselves. The thunder of engines and the rattle of gunfire filled the air, but morale wavered under the weight of that monstrous new threat. As splintered wreckage rained down, every soldier knew that if they could not find a way to stop the synthetic predator, the entire mission, and perhaps the war, hung in the balance. From every direction, the reptilian horde surged forward, jaws snapping and claws slashing. Their bodies were sheathed in thick, armor-like shells, and their curved talons cut through flesh as easily as blades through cloth. Even against tanks and armored vehicles, they showed no hesitation. In mere moments, the creatures converged, pressing their bodies together until they formed a colossal spiked monstrosity, a composite reptile that towered over the city like a living fortress. With each thunderous step, the ground trembled. With each swing of its barbed tail, entire buildings crumbled. The soldiers opened fire, artillery and tank rounds screaming through the air, but their shells only nicked the creature's impregnable carapace. It seemed unstoppable, until the real horror emerged. From hundreds of gaping orifices along its flanks, writhing tentacles burst forth. They snaked across rooftops and tunneled under streets, reaching skyward and slithering along the ground in unnerving synchrony. Each appendage was a living weapon, capable of crushing steel beams in a single vice-like grip. Worse yet, these tentacles absorbed the remains of fallen monsters and twisted predators, recycling their biomass to fuel further growth. In moments, the entire expanse of Kyoto lay under the tendrils' suffocating grip, and the shattered remnants of humanity's defenses looked doomed to live and die at the mercy of this nightmarish brood. Ethan hovered in his dropship, eyes fixed on the nest beast below. He watched, horrified, as the soldier's corpse dissolved without a trace into the writhing mass of tentacles. Almost immediately, the creature's body split open, initiating a fresh round of spawning. From the gaping fissures poured a new brood of predators, smaller than the originals, but far more vicious. These young terrors moved with uncanny speed and coordination. Unlike their mindless forebears, they attacked in squads, targeting low-flying bombers and ground forces with brutal efficiency. In the sky, Ethan's bomber and fighter wings fought desperately to hold them back, but sheer numbers and relentless aggression soon overwhelmed them. Wave after wave of the new predators tore through the air defenses until not a single Allied aircraft remained aloft. On the ground, the island government panicked. They faced an unprecedented dual crisis: contain the nest beast and its lethal offspring, and simultaneously prevent local enhanced citizens from slipping away, possibly in league with foreign powers. Intelligence officers reminded their superiors that this wasn't the first time. On past occasions, islanders with extraordinary abilities had exploited the chaos to escape, sometimes even sharing secrets abroad. Now, With the enemy pressing in on all fronts and trusted lines of communication in doubt, Ethan realized the stakes had never been higher. The fate of the island, and perhaps the entire region, rested on their next move. After witnessing so many comrades fall and enduring one brutal skirmish after another, a number of the island's gifted began to question why they were sacrificing everything here. If they could live comfortably elsewhere, why keep risking their lives? Quietly, they started planning their escape, using their special abilities to slip past government surveillance and evade the authorities. Several foreign powers, always eager to study or weaponize these abilities, opened their doors to defectors. The United States led the way, offering an immediate path to citizenship, a green card in hand the moment they arrived, plus a package of irresistible benefits. New arrivals were welcomed with generous signing bonuses, top-tier housing, access to world-class research facilities, and fast-track employment programs. For many of the island's extraordinary individuals, America's promise of safety and prosperity proved far more appealing than the endless battles and watching friends die. The island government seethed in response, but it was powerless to stop the tide of gifted men and women seeking a new life abroad. Once those extraordinary individuals depart en masse, the island nation will be stripped of any influence in the domain of the supernatural. Still, they had no choice. Kyoto has fallen, and millions of ravenous creatures have already swarmed across the rest of the country. Even the American fleet, though it escaped, was relentlessly pursued by these predators and suffered grievous losses. Chapter 1173, Nuclear Bomb Cleansing. The island nation's defenses had collapsed utterly. Its ground forces were annihilated, and the last survivors, skilled demon manipulators and spiritual adepts, had been slaughtered in droves. Despair spread through the country like wildfire. Conventional arms proved useless against the unending tide of monsters pouring out of Kyoto. Every inch of ground they held was paid for in countless lives and shattered cities. In their darkest hour, the government made a desperate, irrevocable choice. They would unleash every last missile and air defense weapon they possessed on Kyoto, even if it meant dragging the entire nation into the abyss of all-out war. At an emergency summit, top officials fought bitterly over the morality and consequences of such an act. Yet, haunted by the specter of extinction, they reached a grim consensus. No matter the cost, they would stop the creature at the heart of this nightmare, the being they called the great monster of the world-destroying demon nest, before it could spread its terror any farther. As the final orders were issued, the island prepared to commit itself to a single, devastating mission, a nuclear purge aimed at cleansing the source of humanity's greatest threat. Ethan pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the observation port, staring at the nightmare looming on the horizon, its colossal bulk blotting out both sun and sky like a creeping mountain, so vast that any force bold enough to challenge it would surely be swallowed by despair. Now, the island nation, trapped with no hope of escape, had resolved to stand and die together. Deep below ground, Ethan's hands moved swiftly over the control console. He initiated the final launch sequence. Moments later, the missile silo erupted. Sleek warheads shot upward like fiery dragons, their trails cutting arcs of orange and white through the night as they hurtled toward Kyoto. These missiles weren't just an attack. They were the islanders' last, furious roar, a collective exorcism of humanity's fear of the unknown. High above, the rockets wove a lethal web, their incandescent paths illuminating the faces of the crew gathered around him, each pair of eyes burning with defiant resolve. "Now," Ethan commanded, his voice low but unyielding. At once, surface-to-air batteries thundered, anti-aircraft guns rattled, and advanced laser turrets hummed to life. Salvos of explosive shells erupted around the giant silhouette, searing beams lanced toward its armored hull. Firepower poured from every battery, churning the air into a hellish inferno. Over Kyoto, the sky had become a purgatory of smoke, flame, and echoing detonations. Yet Ethan knew this was only the beginning of their stand. As long as breath remained in their lungs, the island nation would fight, and Ethan would lead them into that fire. America, the world's dominant military power, had learned that the island nation was determined to launch an all-out assault on Kyoto. U.S. leaders paused to consider their options, still haunted by the Tokyo disaster. Ghidorah's aerial defenses had been like a Category 6 storm, swallowing everything in its path and shrugging off even nuclear strikes. This time, however, the circumstances were markedly different. The monstrous nest in Kyoto, though it sprawled over nearly 10% of the city, appeared largely immobile, an enormous, helpless target. After an urgent review, American military analysts concluded that the moment to deploy a nuclear strike had arrived. A successful detonation would not only halt the spread of creatures, but might also wipe this global menace off the map in one decisive operation. For any nuclear-armed nation, such an opportunity was irresistible. Wasting no time, the U.S. Strategic Analysis Team began a detailed examination of the nest, tapping advanced satellite imagery and reconnaissance drones to map its exact size, structure, and vulnerabilities. Despite the monster's colossal size, military analysts identified critical weak points in its anatomy, most notably a vulnerable E-core deep within its body. Striking that core precisely, they reasoned, could deal fatal damage. From that realization, a daring strategy emerged: unleash America's vast nuclear arsenal in a coordinated, multi-layered strike against the behemoth. But opting for nuclear weapons was not a decision taken lightly. Detonating warheads over Kyoto would mean obliterating the city itself. Even with clean, modern warheads designed to minimize fallout, the scale of radioactive contamination would be unprecedented. Every street, every building would be blanketed in radioactive dust. The local ecosystem would be devastated, and countless innocent civilians would perish in what would amount to a man-made catastrophe. Still, faced with a creature that threatened global extinction, the chain of command greenlit the operation. Preparations moved forward with ruthless efficiency. At a secure U.S. military base, technicians in full protective gear meticulously inspected each warhead. Sophisticated monitoring instruments checked fuses, yield settings, and shielding systems. In adjacent control rooms, commanders plotted flight paths and detonation altitudes, coordinating missile trajectories to achieve maximum coverage of the target zone while attempting to limit collateral damage outside the city. All the while, satellite operators tracked the monster's every movement. As the final warheads were armed and loaded onto their launchers, a tense silence fell over the base. There was no turning back. Once the order was given, the sky above Kyoto would become a nuclear battleground. And at the center of it all lay the creature's core, a single, fleeting chance to end the nightmare. Ethan stood under the stark glare of the workshop lights as he and his team methodically dismantled each warhead's protective shell. Inside lay the heart of devastation: nuclear fuel rods, detonators, and intricate control systems. Every component, no matter how small, had to be tested and calibrated with absolute precision. They followed a rigid, multi-stage protocol: calibrate, verify, re-verify. A single misstep could trigger a catastrophe beyond imagination. Among the stockpile were aging warheads teetering on the edge of obsolescence, potent dirty bombs bristling with radioactive material, and the most devastating hydrogen weapons ever devised. In the face of an unprecedented crisis, each device, old or new, held its own strategic value. Once the inspections were complete, Ethan oversaw the secure transfer of the warheads onto their designated carriers. Under cover of darkness, strategic bombers roared down hidden runways, lifting off from clandestine bases far inland. Like phantoms in the night sky, they followed meticulously planned flight corridors, steering clear of civilian air traffic and densely populated regions. Inside each aircraft, the warheads were bolted to reinforced launch racks and encapsulated in multiple layers of specialized shielding designed to contain any accidental detonation. Simultaneously, deep beneath the ocean's surface, submarine-launched missiles readied for launch, and intercontinental ballistic missiles on remote silos switched into their final countdown sequences. Every piece of the arsenal was now in motion, locked, armed, and awaiting the orders that would shape the fate of nations. Ethan stood in the dimly lit command center, eyes fixed on the glowing map before him. At his signal, the vast machinery of the National Defense Network roared to life. Across deserts and hidden mountain valleys, intercontinental missiles erupted from their silos. With earth-shaking blasts, they tore through the sky, arcing flawlessly toward their designated targets. Far beneath the ocean's surface, submarines lay in silent readiness. The moment Ethan issued the order, they quietly surfaced to launch depth. From underwater silos, submarine-launched ballistic missiles shot upward, breaching the waves with prodigious force. At a precise altitude, each missile jettisoned its boosters and deployed a nuclear warhead. For a fleeting instant, they eked overhead like blazing meteors. Then came the detonation. Every warhead had been engineered for maximum coverage against the monstrous threat looming on the world stage. Scientists had painstakingly calculated yield and blast type, air bursts to blanket the sky, ground contact detonations to devastate surface defenses, and even subterranean explosions to collapse enemy bunkers and fissure bedrock. Together, these volleys formed a lethal ballet of destruction, choreographed for perfect efficiency. Ethan watched the data streams as each weapon found its mark. The mission's success or failure rested on these dozen simultaneous detonations. In that tense silence, punctuated only by the humming consoles around him, he prayed their planning, their precision, would be enough. To limit radioactive fallout in the surrounding countryside, the warhead's outer casing was built from a specialized composite material designed to absorb and contain dispersed radioactive particles at the moment of detonation. Each bomb also carried an advanced guidance system, guaranteeing unerring accuracy on its designated target. When the first device detonated over Kyoto, the city seemed to lift as if caught in an invisible tremor. A blinding flash of nuclear fire tore through the night, turning darkness to a ghastly daylight in an instant. Within seconds, a colossal mushroom cloud climbed into the sky, its cap glowing an unnatural violet, the unmistakable hallmark of unleashed radiation. Buildings collapsed in a deafening roar, streets dissolved into piles of fractured concrete, and rivers of flame snaked through the ruins. Acrid smoke mixed with the metallic tang of ionized particles, creating a suffocating haze that choked the air and seared the lungs of anyone unfortunate enough to remain unprotected. Chapter 1174. There's no other way. We must poison. Within minutes, the sky above Kyoto seemed rent in two. One by one, nuclear warheads bloomed overhead like the hammer blows of an enraged god. Each blast unleashed a horrifying conflagration of light and fire, and the ground trembled as though the earth itself were crying out in agony. At the moment of detonation, a wave of thermal radiation, an invisible tsunami, raced outward at supersonic speed, instantly turning everything it touched to ash. Then came the shockwave, a brutal force of nature that bore down on the city like a ravenous beast. Buildings groaned and collapsed under the pressure, reduced to crumbling heaps of concrete and metal. Dust and debris exploded skyward, mingling with dark, rolling clouds of radioactive fallout to paint a nightmarish tableau. Kyoto's once tranquil sky, once a serene blue, was now dominated by mushroom clouds that climbed ever higher, blotting out the sun. Black smoke and poisonous dust swirled in the air, heralding a new kind of apocalypse, one forged by human hands. In the end, the city lay under a pall of death, its streets buried beneath rubble, its people vanished, or worse, their fate sealed by the vicious brilliance of the bombs overhead. Mushroom clouds rose into the sky like monstrous pillars, some straight and unyielding, others twisted into surreal shapes, their deadly skirts slowly unfurling. An eerie glow pulsed within them, the raw energy of nuclear fission flashing like a cold, merciless messenger announcing the world's end. At the edges of these clouds, jagged bolts of lightning crackled and thunder rolled, the electromagnetic pulses from the explosions merging with natural storms to compose a dark symphony. In this land baptized by nuclear fire, the great predators, the monsters that once plunged humanity into unending terror, now faced their own destruction. Against the absolute force of these bombs, they appeared grotesquely small and fragile. With every blast, entire hordes of creatures were vaporized in an instant by the searing heat or hurled apart by the shockwave, their blood and bone scattered across the devastated city. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning flesh and spilled blood, the heavy odor of lives snuffed out. It was a scent that turned the stomach and chilled the soul, a grim reminder that in the face of this power, no predator, no matter how fearsome, could survive. Ethan watched in stunned silence as mushroom clouds billowed across the horizon, reducing everything in their path to ash and rubble. The bomb's destructive power was undeniable, but it wasn't absolute. Far from it, especially against the massive creatures the military had dubbed nest behemoths. These hulking organisms possessed armor-like hides and a mysterious regenerative gift. When the warheads detonated, searing fire and bone-shaking shockwaves roared outward, incinerating surface debris in seconds. Yet the nest behemoths barely flinched. Their outer tissues scorched and cracked, but the blasts never breached their cores. As the blinding flare of the explosions finally faded, Ethan, and every soldier with him, could scarcely believe their eyes. Limbs melted by the inferno were already knitting back together, as if some unseen force were sewing new flesh and bone. Deep fissures that should have killed them were closing, replaced by fresh, unblemished tissue. Ethan swallowed hard. "What kind of creature can survive a nuclear strike?" he whispered, heart pounding. Around him, the earth still trembled, but the true terror was only just beginning. Ethan stared at the holo display, disbelief clouding his features. Over the past hour, the world's most powerful nuclear warheads, nearly 1,000 of them, had detonated against the creature's hull, yet the beast stood unscathed. In the Joint Command Center, the American delegation whispered in stunned voices. If even a single nuclear explosion could obliterate a conventional battleship, what should they make of this? 1,000 warheads, enough to level entire metropolitan areas, multiple times over, had only scorched the creature's armor, leaving shallow fissures that vanished almost instantly as living cells swarmed to heal them. Surely the dirty bombs had some effect? An official ventured, tapping at his tablet. Dirty bombs, conventional explosives laced with radioactive material, were designed less for immediate destruction than for long-term contamination. Their radiation could wreak havoc on ecosystems for decades, even centuries. Yet radiation monitors registered nothing unusual around the behemoth. It absorbed the fallout as if it were mere static, impervious to both blast and poison. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. If conventional nukes and radioactive weapons couldn't touch it, what hope did humanity have? Confronting the colossal brood behemoth, the dirty bomb's radiation did nothing but give its hide an eerie, fluorescent sheen. Instead of sapping its strength, the blast seemed to invigorate the creature. Its gaping pores now oozed with predator offspring, thousands more swarming forth in a sickening tide. Even the most battle-hardened American commanders stared in disbelief. If thousands of nuclear warheads couldn't fell it, then conventional firepower had truly reached its limit. In the makeshift command center, General Carter studied the damage assessments with a grim expression. "We miscalculated the thickness of its dermal armor," he said. "Most of the bomb's yield was dissipated against that impenetrable surface." A military analyst confirmed the verdict. Though the warhead detonated mere meters from the beast's flank, its unimaginable density dispersed the explosion's energy. The force that could have obliterated an entire city was instead absorbed like water in a sponge, leaving the behemoth unscathed. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then Colonel Ramirez cleared his throat. "Sir, do we have a bunker buster option?" General Carter closed his eyes, weighing the last remaining tactics. Outside, the nest behemoth pulsed with unnatural life, its brood swelling by the second. America's toughest weapons had failed, but the decision on the next move would shape the fate of everyone on the planet. No matter how powerful, a bunker buster won't even scratch a creature that size. The suggestion to deploy bunker buster bombs was quickly dismissed. True, those munitions could penetrate miles of Earth, but against this colossal beast, even the most advanced warhead would only scar its hide, never reach its vital core. "What about biological agents?" another voice chimed in. "Couldn't we unleash a toxin strong enough to poison entire ecosystems?" A handful of hardliners in the Pentagon began pushing for just such drastic measures. Their argument had a grim logic. If conventional arms kept failing, why not turn to America's most tightly controlled and least understood weapons of mass destruction? Deep in secured cold storage vaults, vials and containers of long-dormant pathogens lay waiting. These were the legacies of secret Cold War programs, terrifying, engineered viruses and toxins that might, at last, offer humanity a fighting chance against the unstoppable beast. VX nerve agent, often called the invisible killer, is a colorless, odorless chemical whose exceptionally stable molecular structure remains lethal even under extreme conditions. By targeting the central nervous system, VX disrupts normal nerve signaling. Even the tiniest exposure can trigger violent muscle spasms, shut down respiratory function, and prove fatal. Chapter 1175, The Kyoto Catastrophe. Ethan stared at the briefing screen, his pulse quickening. A single gram of this colorless, odorless liquid, VX nerve agent, was enough to kill tens of thousands in an open field. Its potency lay in the way it cripples the nervous system, plunging victims into excruciating paralysis before merciful death. It was the very same agent featured in the film The Rock. According to the plan, American operatives would use a precision delivery system to inject VX directly into the behemoth's respiratory tract, hoping to shut down its nervous system in an instant. The challenge, Ethan knew, was containment. If a stray plume drifted toward populated areas, the fallout would be an irreversible ecological and humanitarian disaster. But chemical toxins weren't the United States' only card. Covert research facilities had engineered genetically modified viruses, bioweapons custom designed to exploit specific biological traits in their hosts. Unlike fleeting nerve agents, these pathogens could spread silently, persisting in the environment and striking long after the initial release. As Ethan absorbed the grim details, he realized humanity faced not just a rampaging monster, but a battlefield of unseen terrors. Injected into a behemoth's bloodstream, the genetically engineered virus was designed to replicate wildly, shred the creature's cellular structure, and ignite a cascade of chain reactions that would finish it off. But the weapon carried enormous risks. If even a single viral particle escaped into the wild, it could recombine with native organisms and spawn entirely new and potentially far deadlier pathogens. The specter of an ecological catastrophe made every scientist involved deeply uneasy. Despite those fears, military command pushed the program forward. Within days, the first batch of biological and chemical agents was loaded onto armored transports and rushed to the front lines for live deployment tests. What came back was nothing short of astonishing. As soon as the toxins or viruses touched the thick, scaly hide of a nest behemoth, they were neutralized on the spot. A dense, complex microbial community living on the creature's skin chewed through the samples faster than the virus could even begin to invade. None of it breached the surface barrier. And that, the report warned in stark, unblinking terms, was only the beginning. More disturbing developments lay ahead, ones that threatened not just the success of the mission, but the very balance of the world's fragile ecosystems. Ethan watched from the observation tower as the trial entered its next phase, and disaster struck faster than anyone had anticipated. Microbes that had initially seemed harmless to humans, once they encountered the behemoth's extraordinary internal environment, began to mutate in unpredictable ways. These new strains not only survived more aggressively, but actually attacked human tissue. Within hours, they were reproducing at an alarming rate, spreading outward like a plague. Camps and forward positions descended into chaos as soldiers fell ill with gruesome skin ulcers, labored breathing, and other baffling symptoms. The medical teams worked around the clock, but each case only multiplied their frustrations. They had no cure, no protocol for this. News of the outbreak reached the nearby island nation in an instant. Their government erupted in outrage, accusing Ethan's superiors of deploying biological and possibly chemical weapons on their sovereign soil. In a blistering public statement, the island's top leadership demanded answers. How could you believe we'd tolerate such an assault on our territory and our people? Diplomatic channels crackled with furious protests. Demonstrations sprang up in every major city of the island, banners calling Ethan's project a war crime. Back at the research base, Ethan felt the weight of their accusation crushing him. He knew the original goal had been scientific, harvesting the behemoth's regenerative properties to cure disease. But now all anyone saw was a threat unleashed. As tensions escalated on both sides, military, medical, and diplomatic, Ethan realized that containing the microbial outbreak would be only the first step. Rebuilding trust with the island nation, salvaging his team's reputation, and preventing an outright war would demand more than any one man had ever faced. Yet he also knew there was no turning back. The mutated pathogens had already taken root, and time was not on their side. This is a flagrant violation of international law and every principle of human decency. Saiko Busujima's voice rang out, trembling with outrage. From where I stood beside her, the devastation was impossible to ignore. I can't say for certain whether any of the nest behemoths survived the strike, but whatever remained of them was beyond salvage. Though the initial release of biological and chemical agents had been measured, we all knew that measured was relative when each behemoth rivaled an entire city in mass. The blast and the mutant microorganisms it unleashed had already begun their deadly sweep across the island, and the fallout threatened every coastal town nearby. Panic set in within hours. Supermarket shelves were stripped bare, and desperate families clamored to board the first evacuation vessels. Seiko and her team had retreated from the front lines to the safety of the Temple of Heaven, but even there, the tension was palpable. "I can't believe America would go this far," Shizuka Hiratsuka muttered, her eyes dark with disbelief. Beside her, Kasumigaoka Uta let out a shaky laugh. "Thank goodness we escaped in time," she said, glancing at the distant, smoky horizon. "If we'd stayed even a moment longer, our spiritual wards would have been useless, just like those hunters the nest released. Did you see how they keeled over from the gas?" I alone remained silent, my thoughts racing. The cost of our so-called cautious experiment had become all too clear. Now, as the island's fate hung in the balance, we could only brace ourselves for the widening ripple of death and destruction that lay ahead. Ethan didn't expect the United States to go that far. But then again, when you're not even human, rivalry with Great Britain knows no limits. He shrugged. It was typical behavior. "Ethan, won't those poisonous gases, microorganisms, and monsters released by that giant creature reach us?" the three women asked, their voices tight with fear. "Don't worry," Ethan replied coolly. "Where I'm standing is the safest place on Earth." He wasn't a demon, just far too lazy to follow the usual plot twists. Right now, this location would soon become the one true safe haven in a world gone mad. He paused, his expression growing serious. "That said, I'm afraid this crisis is only beginning. Now that America has resorted to such extremes, they're likely to become even more ruthless. And with each portal that opens to other realms, more monsters will spill through. Eventually, there may be nowhere left to hide." Uta, Kasumigaoka, and the other two women exhaled in relief, grateful, for the moment, to be out of immediate danger. Yet Ethan's warning hovered in their minds. No one here wanted to die. Survival, they knew now more than ever, depended on staying one step ahead of what came next. Ethan watched in mounting frustration as the nest behemoth waded through the toxic cloud as if it weren't even there. Unmanned predator drones swarmed around it, launching missile salvos and strafing runs, but the poison fog held them at bay. None of their strikes could penetrate the blistering haze. Behind the scenes in Washington, the mood was just as tense. The Pentagon and President Dembel's inner circle had flirted with the idea of deploying a genetically engineered virus to wipe out the creatures once and for all. In the end, however, they deemed the collateral risks, an uncontrolled mutation, a global pandemic, simply too great to bear. Instead, the United States poured its resources into a far more audacious plan, a next-generation Earth-penetrating bomb powered by thermonuclear fusion. Conventional H-bombs rely on a fission detonation to prime the fusion core, but that method is both fiendishly complex and perilously prone to runaway reactions. A misfire could unleash a series of uncontrolled nuclear blasts, with consequences that would eclipse even the devastation wrought by the nest creatures themselves. If, however, the engineers could perfect a safe fusion trigger mechanism, the payoff would be unprecedented, a single strike capable of smashing through the behemoth's armored shell and obliterating its internal hive structure. In the command center, Ethan tapped his pen against the briefing folder, feeling the weight of every life depending on this gamble. No one wanted to unleash a weapon of such magnitude, yet with the nest threat growing by the hour, they had no other choice. If science could solve the fusion puzzle, they might finally turn the tide. But if they failed, the world would have even bigger nightmares than the ones bursting out of those underground tunnels. Meanwhile, tension on the island reached a breaking point. As the colossal creature nesting offshore drew ever closer, fear spread like wildfire among the inhabitants. Panic-stricken crowds poured into the streets, desperate to escape what they feared would become ground zero for the coming disaster. In a last-ditch effort to restore order, the island's government declared an immediate blockade of every sea and air route. Though these emergency measures did slow the exodus, they could not quell the underlying terror. After all, when survival is at stake, no official decree can stop people from trying to save themselves. Chapter 1177, The Rise of the Wu Family. Unchecked power can strip a person of his humanity, transforming him into one of the demons or monsters he once dreaded. Yet some still choose that path, driven by desperation, ambition, or stubborn pride. They lie on cold operating tables, submit to painful injections, and endure every torment in the hope that experimental drugs will awaken in them a new, terrifying strength. So far, none have succeeded. In response, seasoned fighters and masters of the martial arts stepped forward. They opened schools of their own, teaching rigorous training methods designed to temper both body and spirit. Only with a physique honed through martial discipline and a will fortified against every hardship could one hope to withstand the mutagenic experiments and emerge alive, much less awakened. Without this preparation, the odds of survival or breakthrough were virtually nil. Recognizing the urgency, the island nation's government acted swiftly. Martial arts instruction was woven into the national education system, and every citizen, no exceptions, was compelled to train. Under this new mandate, the era's emphasis shifted. Literature and the fine arts took a back seat, and while science remained important, it was no longer the sole pursuit of the nation. Amid these sweeping changes, Ethan stood at the threshold of a world forever altered by the promise and peril of awakened power. Except for science, every other academic subject was all but abandoned, replaced by a fanatical devotion to martial arts. Across the island nation, from the bustling school playgrounds to the tranquil community parks, even in the cozy, sunlit courtyards of family homes, children young and old alike were striking, blocking, or brandishing wooden swords. Their stances might have been clumsy, but each movement revealed a fierce determination. This was no longer an age when one could carve out a comfortable life on book learning alone. It had become a ruthless arena where succeed or perish was the unspoken rule. Toddlers, sprightly seniors, everyone seemed caught up in the same fevered ritual of training, as though gearing up for a challenge that would demand every ounce of their strength. With the silent dawn of this extraordinary era, human society had been turned on its head. Though scientific progress trudged onward, it no longer defined a person's worth. For those unable to shatter barriers in the laboratory or lecture hall, mastery of martial arts had emerged as the only true path to power, and, perhaps, survival. Through relentless effort and disciplined training, the most gifted among them can tap into demonic power or awaken spiritual energy, transforming into spiritualists or demonic power wielders with truly extraordinary abilities and carving out their place in this new world. Many fighters and martial artists have achieved breakthrough after breakthrough. Some, through grueling physical conditioning and countless battles, have inadvertently fused demonic power or unlocked spiritual energy in a life-or-death moment. From that instant on, they set foot on the path to transcendence. These success stories shine like beacons, inspiring countless others to believe that they, too, can become spiritualists through martial practice. To increase newcomers' odds of survival and success, veteran fighters and masters have established a rigorous master-apprentice system. Seasoned mentors personally guide their young charges, honing their combat techniques and imparting hard-won lessons in survival, all in the crucible of real-world battles. Whenever an apprentice's life is on the line, their master always arrives at the crucial moment, both safeguarding the apprentice and giving them priceless, real-world combat experience. Under this system, new spiritists sprang up like mushrooms after a spring rain, from gifted youths to battle-hardened veterans. Rather than striking out alone, these fledgling spiritists returned to their master's side, forming tight-knit groups. Over time, these collectives swelled and coalesced into a no one on the island could ignore, the Wuxi. Unlike the once proud martial families that slowly decayed into obscurity, these emerging clans radiated extraordinary vitality, Centered on fighting experts and martial artists, they upheld the honor and discipline of traditional martial lineages while infusing them with fresh creativity and energy for the new era. Chapter 1. The Island's Great Clans. On this island nation, time-honored martial lineages have once again risen to prominence, their ancient reputations rekindled by the sudden emergence of extraordinary powers. Among them, the Yagyu and Doshima families, whose sword arts and unbroken traditions date back centuries, have restored their former glory at the forefront of the new era. The Takagi family, though a late arrival on the scene, has made a name for itself through rigorous study and inventive applications of Miyamoto Musashi's legendary techniques. The Hattori clan, direct descendants of the renowned ninja Hattori Hanzo, continue to distinguish themselves with masterful ninjutsu and razor-sharp intelligence, winning decisive victories in every extraordinary conflict. The Koga family has asserted its dominance among the island's warrior houses, its members wielding the stealth and lethal precision of Koga-style ninjutsu with unrivaled skill. Yet above them all towers the Honda family, descendants of Honda Tadakatsu, the peerless warrior of the East. From the tumultuous battlefields of the Warring States period right up to the present, the Hondas have remained one of the island's most revered samurai houses. It was Honda Tadakatsu's fearless courage and tactical genius that earned him the lasting admiration of Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi, cementing his place in history as one of Japan's greatest generals. In this age of awakened power, these storied clans prepare once more to test their mettle and claim their destiny. Honda Tadakatsu fought in 57 battles during his lifetime and never once suffered a serious wound. His perfect record became the stuff of legend, celebrated by generations to come. After retiring from the field, Tadakatsu poured his boundless energy into wood carving, honing his artistry until a seemingly minor accident claimed his life. Even today, his achievements and indomitable spirit remain a touchstone for countless admirers. When the new era dawned, the Honda clan did not drown in the currents of history. Drawing on their storied heritage and relentless drive, they once again secured their place at the pinnacle of the island nation's military families. Beyond training a fresh wave of warriors, they have made remarkable strides in researching and harnessing extraordinary powers. As a result, the Honda name now stands behind hundreds of spiritists, many of them young rising stars brimming with raw talent and limitless potential. Alongside the Hondas, the Wu family has long been recognized as a dominant force among the island's martial houses. Already numbering in the thousands of spiritists, the Wu clan, famed since antiquity for its martial prowess, has seized the opportunities of the extraordinary era to propel the family into a new age of strength and influence. For the warriors of the Wu family, awakening one's spiritual power is almost second nature. With the correct technique, an unbreakable will, and an unrelenting drive to win, it's only a matter of time before they manifest as fully fledged psychics. Yet even their growing ranks pale in comparison to the relentless hordes of monstrous predators, ghostly fiends, and the enormous nest behemoths still to come. Since the catastrophe, New Tokyo's population has swelled rather than dwindled. Survivors from Yokohama, Saitama, and other nearby cities have poured into the capital, despite the demons and monsters now prowling its streets. Can just tens of thousands of psychics possibly defend tens of millions of innocent lives? Chapter 1178, A Shadow Over the Fleet, Kraken? Norwegian sea monster? No, it was something far more sinister, the ruler of darkness. Off the shores of the island nation, the ocean's surface glittered beneath the morning sun, yet it bore an almost unnerving stillness. On that shimmering expanse lay a forest of warships, mile-long carriers, missile cruisers, destroyers, each a towering monument in steel, a testament to human ingenuity and power. They guarded these waters with an iron will, the promise of absolute sea control. High above this imposingly calm scene, a small, incongruous black shape drifted silently against the pale sky. That was Ethan. Cloaked in shadows, he hovered beyond the reach of radar and sight, intent on crippling the world's navigation networks and forcing mankind to return to isolation. Below him, the United States Navy, still the undisputed master of the seas, boasted 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, 9 after the recent clash with Ghidorah that had already claimed 2, and hundreds of surface combatants. Even after suffering heavy losses to that gargantuan foe, the fleet had reclaimed its dominance. No challenger dared contest its supremacy. Yet here, suspended above what seemed an impregnable maritime fortress, Ethan readied the first strike of his dark crusade. An unprecedented crisis was closing in, one that could shatter the illusion of naval invincibility and plunge the world back into the shadows. A sentry with hawk-like eyes, posted at the rail, suddenly cried out, his voice tight with panic. "Underwater! Look down!" His alarm tore through the routine calm aboard the warship. Officers and sailors spun to the rail, peering through the glittering sea for any hint of movement. At first, there was only a faint, dark blur beneath the surface. Then, gradually, a titanic shadow rose from the depths. It was wider than any whale they'd ever seen, so immense that even the most battle-hardened soldiers felt their blood chill and their hearts pound. They knew the blue whale was the largest creature on Earth, up to 33 meters long and weighing as much as 181 tons. But this monstrous silhouette dwarfed that record. The dark expanse stretched an estimated 30 meters across, and its length slithered beyond the limits of human sight, twisting through the water like some colossal serpent. No one dared speak. Every mind went blank, struggling to fathom the creature's true scale. 300 meters? 500? Or could it be even longer? On the deck stood Ethan, gripping the rail so tightly his knuckles went white. He stared out at the yawning shape beneath the waves, forcing himself to draw breath. Once he'd convinced himself this wasn't a hallucination, he steeled his resolve. Whatever this Leviathan was, it was coming, and the next moments would decide their fate. Ethan's heart froze the moment the ocean fell silent. Then, without warning, a deafening roar shattered the stillness, an undersea volcano come to life. Water tore itself apart under some immense, unseen force, thrusting a wall of liquid tens of meters high toward the warship. The steel leviathans that humans once hailed as invincible now seemed frail, like dead leaves caught in a river's surge, flung into the air before crashing down, nearly capsizing under the onslaught. Crewmen scrambled for handholds as the deck lurched violently beneath their feet. From the depths rose the true architect of their terror, the legendary Kraken. Its huge head broke the surface, rough skin glistening in the pale dawn light. Dozens of writhing tentacles fanned out around it, each thick enough to crush a vessel's hull in a single squeeze. Two luminescent eyes, cold and ancient, watched the warship with uncanny intelligence. Ethan pressed himself against the railing, barely daring to breathe as the creature's head, over 30 meters in diameter, loomed above him. Most of its sinuous body remained hidden beneath the waves. He had no way of knowing whether the Kraken stretched a few hundred meters from tip to tail, or kilometer. All he knew was that nothing in human history had ever prepared him for this moment. Commander Hawkins snapped out of his shock and roared, "Open fire! Now!" In an instant, the warship's defense network sprang to life. 6 barrels of the Phalanx close-in weapon system spun up to blistering speed and unleashed a torrential hail of 20mm armor-piercing rounds. Each shell auto-tracked, locked on, and engaged the target, the very pinnacle of human engineering. But when those rounds slammed into the monster's hide, they sparked and ricocheted off as if hitting an invisible shield. The creature didn't even flinch. Instead, it emitted a deafening, multi-layered roar that swept over the deck like a sonic tsunami. Sailors clutched their ears, stumbling to their knees in agony. Some, overwhelmed by the blast, collapsed unconscious. In that moment, the warship's most advanced weapons and all of humanity's technological might felt painfully inadequate against the raw, primordial force standing before them. Ethan steadied himself against the rail as the frigate pitched and rolled in the swells, like a paper boat adrift in a basin. Across the expanse of gray sea, the enemy's colossal vessels loomed, their sheer size enough to crush the crew's resolve. Even the toughest sailors exchanged glances of unease. "The main gun is ready to fire," came the sharp call from the bridge. At that signal, the ship seemed to shudder awake, every console lighting up, every weapon system clicking into combat mode. Gone are the days of 2 ironclads trading broadsides at point-blank range. Today's naval battles play out under a very different set of rules. Against the specter of supersonic anti-ship missiles, stealthy mines, and low-flying strike aircraft, modern warships must defend themselves on every front. That's why the old behemoth guns, 12-inch and bigger, have all but vanished. In their place, fast-firing 127mm cannons guard the decks, their real task to ward off airborne threats and intercept incoming missiles, rather than settle the fight at sea. Ethan watched the data streams dancing across the screens, tracing the paths of radar blips that could be anything from a harmless fishing boat to a lethal missile launcher. Somewhere out there, hidden by dusk and deception, the enemy was preparing to strike. And while the main gun before him might no longer decide the war in a single salvo, it was up to Ethan and his crew to make every shot count and to hold fast against an opponent that threatened to overwhelm them by size, speed, and surprise. In the face of an unparalleled crisis, these seemingly modest main guns had become humanity's last line of defense. Boom! A thunderous roar ripped through the early morning haze as the 5-inch gun aboard the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer unleashed its first round. The turret pivoted with razor-sharp speed, locking onto the gargantuan sea monster that had risen from the abyss, an impossible chimera, part octopus, part squid, its bulk sheathed in a brilliantly colored bed, nautilus-like shell. A crackling, garbled transmission crackled over the comms. "Please, you, collect 6-9 book." For an instant, the crew froze. Was it a warning? A code? Before their training kicked in and they refocused on the target. Inside the barrel, superheated, high-pressure gases launched the shell at breakneck velocity. It streaked skyward like a flaming meteor, trailing a hiss of vapor. High-speed cameras recorded every millisecond of the impact. The shell's casing collapsed against the monster's massive tentacles, shattering under unimaginable force, then exploded in a violent fireball. But the blast proved almost futile. The creature recoiled only briefly, as if the detonation had merely sparked a match against its armored hide. Unfazed, it reeled back, its many eyes gleaming with something between curiosity and contempt. Humanity's fate, and the hours to come, hung in the balance. Ethan watched in stunned silence as flames roared along the surface of the creature's tentacles, only to be absorbed and led by its colossal form, coalescing into a deadly, crackling energy. In the next instant, that force whipped back with terrifying speed, striking the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer that had fired the shot. It was a stark, brutal collision of human engineering and raw nature. Confronted by tentacles tens of times larger than their ships, even the U.S. Navy's proudest destroyers seemed eerily fragile beneath the monster's shadow. Chapter 1179, Gatanja versus the American Navy. Under the tentacle's unrelenting grip, the destroyer's hull felt as though it were being crushed by a gargantuan hand rising from the abyss. In an instant, the once rigid steel buckled and twisted, denting like a soda can under immense pressure. The ripping metal screamed a sharp, piercing cry, reminiscent of a star's dying wail at a black hole's edge, resonating in the bones of every sailor and sending their hearts racing. There was no doubt that the creature behind the tentacle was a colossal behemoth. Every movement it made unleashed violent shockwaves through sea and sky, racing outward faster than sound to form an invisible wall. This barrier not only swept aside seawater, but also compressed the air, creating a spectacular ripple that, like an ultrasonic pulse underwater, carried enough force to jolt a 10,000-ton warship. As the ripples reached the hull of the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, serving as the flagship, they blossomed into a spiderweb of cracks that raced across its steel plating in the blink of an eye. In that instant, the 150-meter warship's spine seemed to snap under an invisible force, its midsection buckling in a way that defied all laws of physics. Inside, deck lights flickered wildly and alarms blared, useless heralds of the catastrophe to come. Boom! A second, deafening explosion tore through the sea surface. A towering wall of water, tens of meters high, erupted skyward, spraying seawater and debris in every direction. It rose like the vanguard of a tsunami, but even more terrifying than its height was the raw, unstoppable force driving it. Under the onslaught of that force, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer was lifted from the sea like a kite with a snapped string. Enormous tentacles hurled it through the air, and with almost supernatural speed and power it slammed into the two warships flanking it. In an instant, all three vessels were thrown into chaos. Below decks, officers and crew battled desperately to steady the hull, but against such a titanic impact, their efforts were helplessly small. A dreadful pressure coursed through the joined hulls, steel groaning in protest as if the very world were collapsing. The air filled with the screech of metal twisting, the rasp of tearing plates, and the low, shuddering moan of tortured iron, sounds that struck the mind like the slow opening of hell's gates, unleashing boundless terror and despair. Sparks erupted in every direction as the hull was crushed and warped. In some spots, the plating bulged outward like overinflated balloons, threatening to burst at any moment. Elsewhere, the metal spiraled into grotesque twists and kinks. Through it all, the ship's fighting spirit, embodied by her sailors, held on by a thread, determined to survive the fury of whatever monstrous force lay beneath the waves. The hull twisted and buckled in a grotesque, almost surreal contortion, striking everyone who saw it like a waking nightmare. Under the tremendous shock, the missile launcher shattered, its once precise mechanisms torn apart by violent vibration. The stored rockets, unable to withstand the jolt, detonated in an instant, igniting the surrounding air in a hellish inferno. Those roaring flames, like tongues of death, devoured everything in their path, casting the dark sea in an eerie, flickering light, and reflecting the terror and despair etched on every face. Fragments of the great vessel rained down in a sorrowful shower. Some pieces plummeted into the water, sending columns of spray skyward as if the ocean itself were mourning the loss of these iron giants. Others hurtled upward, tracing brief, tragic arcs across the night sky, brilliant streaks that promised splendor even as they portended destruction and the shattering of hope. Ethan stood at the shattered bridge of the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, his knuckles white on the railing. Even this cutting-edge warship, with its advanced radar arrays, missile defenses, and fully automated combat systems, was proving utterly helpless against the horror before him. Far below, in the perpetual blackness of the abyss, a living behemoth had emerged. Its colossal tentacles writhed like serpents, demonstrating a raw, almost supernatural power that defied every law of physics. The deckhouse lay in ruins, collapsed as though a prehistoric giant had stomped through it like a child's toy. Steel plates and support beams were strewn across the deck, their original geometry lost beyond recognition. Where once precise engineering had held firm, now twisted girders jutted at impossible angles, like layers of rock violently deformed by some cataclysmic upheaval. These contorted fragments of metal looked as if they'd been sculpted by invisible, titanic hands. Every surface was encrusted with a thick layer of rust, a silent record of the infernal heat and crushing pressures that accompanied the beast's vengeance. Under extreme external forces, the metal deformed plastically until it reached its yield point, and in many places, it even fractured. Amid the wreckage, countless jagged shards of metal were flung skyward by an almost supernatural force. They traced brilliant silver arcs against the storm-darkened sky and fell in every direction like a meteor shower. Each fragment traveled faster than the speed of sound, producing thunderous sonic booms and leaving thin, white vapor trails, condensed shock waves carving fleeting patterns through the air. Friction from their blistering speeds heated them to incandescent temperatures, bathing their surfaces in a hellish red-blue glow, as though they were fire-born stars descending to Earth. Finally, spent of momentum, the fragments plummeted into the cold sea. Upon impact, each sent concentric ripples radiating across the water's surface, before cooling instantly with a sharp hiss, the sizzling kiss of superheated metal meeting bracing seawater. Ethan stood on the battered deck as fire and seawater clashed in a furious, almost primal display. Scalding steam hissed and curled skyward where the waves lashed at the flames, turning each swell into a writhing molten canvas. The blaze, born of a ruptured fuel line and the lingering heat of the explosion, roared like a brief glimpse of hell set loose on the ocean. Its color shifted from a familiar orange-yellow to an ominous dark blue, tracing concentric zones of heat. The outer orange tongues rarely exceeded a few hundred degrees Celsius, but where the flame glowed cobalt, temperatures soared into the thousands, hot enough to liquefy steel. Yet the sea was no mere bystander. Driven by both gravity and indignation, seawater surged against the inferno, forcing it back in agitation. Whenever a curtain of spray met the blaze, a thunderous roar of steam erupted, only for the wind's capricious gusts to scatter embers across the deck. Ethan tightened his grip on the railing, heart pounding. Every second brought the danger of a secondary blast or a structural collapse. His uniform was already damp with sweat and salt spray, but he dared not step back. If the fire overtook this vessel, there would be no survivors. Here, in the tension between fire's fury and the sea's stubborn resistance, Ethan understood that salvation depended on relentless courage and a spark of luck. When seawater met the raging flames, it vaporized instantly, filling the air with a dense cloud of steam. This was not only a simple physical reaction, but also a fierce oxidation reduction process, and at those scorching temperatures, the dissolved salts crystallized into a ghostly veil of salt mist. The result was an unpredictable, eerie fog that cloaked the disaster in mystery. Boom, boom, boom. In rapid succession, thunderous explosions tore through the hulls of the three warships, the Burke-class destroyer and its two accompanying frigates. In a single, devastating moment, the vessels hurtled together as if squeezed by an invisible giant's hand, their steel plates buckling and twisting into one inseparable mass. Each ship had been on a separate mission, its own course across the waves, but fate bound them together in that cataclysmic instant. Eyewitnesses would later argue over the source of the blast. Some claimed a torpedo magazine had detonated, others whispered of a reactor gone critical. Whatever the trigger, the force was equivalent to a 10,000-ton forging press, turning once formidable hulls into little more than crumpled paper, mercilessly compressed, shattered, and fused into a single grotesque orb. The Burke-class destroyer, a steel behemoth that once prowled the open ocean with pride, now lay in shattered ruins, its original silhouette almost unrecognizable. Thick armored plates had been torn into jagged fragments, as if a colossal hammer had pounded them relentlessly, leaving every surface cracked and deeply dented. Inside, the ship's skeleton was equally devastated. Bulkheads were ripped away, piping lay mangled and split, and oil and seawater pooled together in a grimy, turbulent stew. When the two warships collided, the force released rivaled thousands of tons of TNT, sending a shock straight through the seabed and sparking a minor undersea tremor. The impact compressed the water beneath them into a towering, high-pressure wall that then exploded outward in concentric waves. As these new swells met the existing currents, they interfered and intertwined, carving out spectacular whirlpools across the surface. Ethan stared in stunned silence as a massive whirlpool churned ahead of him. At its center, the water roared like a runaway river, dragging everything within reach into its furious embrace. Around the edges, though, the sea seemed strangely calm, a deceptive ring of glassy peace encircling the deadly vortex. Below the surface, the great iron hulls of three warships gave way. Their immense weight forced seawater downward, creating a powerful downward current and a low-pressure pocket on the seabed. Even as the ships slipped deeper, mud and gravel cascaded off their decks, settling into a thick, choking layer of sediment. In moments, the vessel's final motion stilled. With a last hiss of trapped air, they vanished into the inky depths, leaving behind only widening ripples and the faint, acrid odor of scorched steel. Above, storm clouds sagged heavy and low, pressing down on the turbulent sea. Whitecaps roared under the gale, hurling spray and foam against the shattered remains of the fleet, each impact an echoing thunderclap. On the distant horizon, a pillar of black smoke, Ganange's grim signature, sprawled like a wound across the sky. In this theater of chaos and destruction, Ethan could only grip the rail and watch, powerless, as the ocean reclaimed its victims. Everyone who saw it, whether from the distant observation ships, peering through telescopes, or among the battered survivors clinging to life, was struck speechless by the sudden calamity. Shock glazed their eyes and blanked their minds, as though their very souls had been wrenched away, leaving only hollow shells trembling in a merciless world. The damp, salty breeze drifted across the deck, but it could not lift the heavy silence or erase the despair etched on their faces. Only the crash of waves and the occasional distant boom reminded them that the battle still raged and that the faint spark of hope flickered somewhere beyond the wreckage. Then came the sharp cry of command. "Launch!" Commander Miller, middle-aged, his features set in determination yet lined with exhaustion, snapped the order, rallying the American fleet for a desperate counterattack. Ethan stood on the bridge, eyes fixed on the targeting display. With a single command, the ship's launchers erupted, sending their costly cruise missiles into the night like bolts of divine retribution. Brilliant streaks of light carved deadly arcs overhead as each warhead locked onto the hulking form of Gatenja, an unholy giant whose every breath exhaled death. These weapons had been engineered for strikes at ranges of hundreds, even tens of thousands of kilometers. Tonight, they flew at virtually point-blank range, closer than any designer had ever dared to imagine. But in moments like this, hesitation was a luxury none could afford. To hold fire was to welcome certain destruction. To launch, however slim the odds, offered at least a sliver of hope. Without a second thought, Ethan initiated the final launch sequence. The missile's shrieks and the crew's ragged breathing wove together into a grim overture. Brace for impact. Ethan's voice crackled over the intercom, every syllable laced with steel and resolve. Ethan and the rest of the crew moved without a moment's hesitation, seizing whatever they could, handrails, stanchions, even loose seats, to hold on for dear life. Fear and tension were etched on every face, but stronger still was their desperate will to survive. Boom! A missile struck the Gatenja with earth-shattering force. For an instant, the darkness gave way to a blinding fireball almost 100 meters across, like a miniature sun dropping into the sea. Its searing heat and radiance lit up the waves for miles around. Then came the shockwave, a roaring, invisible beast that battered the ship from stem to stern. Towers of seawater rose into the sky, only to collapse again in horrific walls of spray, churning the ocean into a boiling chaos. The warship groaned and bucked under the blast, heeling over as if it might roll at any second. Still reeling from the explosion, her hull rested at an alarming 45-degree angle against the water. Ethan's knuckles whitened as he clung to a rail. Around him, alarm screamed and bulkheads groaned. Every fiber of the ship trembled. But even amid the upheaval, one thought burned in his mind: survive. The American warship was plunged into an unprecedented crisis. A sudden, violent shock ripped through its hull, tossing sailors like rag dolls in a child's playroom. Men slammed against bulkheads and each other in the cramped passageways, their bodies twisting and colliding with bone-shattering force. The air filled with the sickening crack of fractures, agonized cries, and the wail of buckling steel, an inferno of noise that turned the ship's interior into hell on earth. Slowly, agonizingly, the tremors subsided. The roaring flames and rolling waves grew distant as the vessel righted itself, buffeted but still afloat. When at last silence settled over the deck, the survivors lay strewn across the slick planks, battered, bloodied, and shell-shocked. Scars and crimson smears marked their faces and uniforms. Many lay motionless, their bodies already growing cold. In death, their expressions were frozen in terror and defiance, silent testament to the desperate struggle for life and the helplessness that had seized them in those brutal moments. Chapter 1181, The Dawn of the Isolated Island Era. What on earth is that thing? In the American military's command center, the tension was palpable. Every officer froze as if their blood had turned to ice. On the massive video wall, live satellite images revealed a once proud fleet reduced to floating ruins. Destroyers and cruisers lay hulled and broken, adrift against the dark sea. Center stage in this wreckage loomed a creature so colossal it seemed the undisputed master of these waters. Its shell spiraled outward in vast, smooth coils, the surface unnervingly black and dotted with countless round apertures, each like a portal to some unfathomable abyss. Beneath the heaving carapace, two small, beady eyes glinted just above a cavernous maw. When the beast bellowed, the sound was a deep, resonant roar, part whale song, part elephant trumpet, that rolled over the ocean like a tremor, making even steel hulks shudder. From the gaping shell mouth snaked dozens of massive tentacles, each as thick as a tree trunk and as fluid as serpents in the air. Between them jutted armor-plated pincers, razor-sharp and dripping with menace. As the creature opened its jaws, the space within yawned wide enough to swallow a destroyer whole. Silence reigned in the command center as officers exchanged haunted looks. They had witnessed countless threats, but nothing like this. 2 rows of razor-sharp teeth, like a mountain of knives, looked almost delicate in that cavernous maw. For this creature, there was no need to chew, it simply swallowed its prey whole. Did it work? A commander demanded, his voice tight with anxiety. He had just ordered a salvo of missiles, tactical nukes among them, to obliterate the monster. Now, staring at the screens, he waited for confirmation. Instead, he saw the warhead strike and detonate. Then, nothing. The colossal beast still floated on the ocean's surface, unscathed, as though the assault had been nothing more than a nuisance. On the radar displays, humanity's greatest achievement, the aircraft carrier, looked absurdly small beside it. A carrier's flight deck might span 50 to 80 meters in width and 300 to 500 meters in length, but here it was no larger than a fishing boat. With a single, effortless sweep of its tentacles, the creature could twist those steel giants into scrap. A U.S. Nimitz-class nuclear carrier, usually untouchable, had offered zero resistance. Its hull was shredded and ripped apart in seconds. The sheer scale of the monster defied belief. Even now, it drifted there, silent and triumphant, a living testament to the futility of mankind's most powerful weapons. At 200 meters tall, with tentacles and pincers stretching hundreds of meters, the creature rose from the sea like a skyscraper looming over the horizon. Its weight, an almost inconceivable 200,000 tons, pressed the water down, while its nautilus-like shell, perched high above the waves, gleamed with an otherworldly menace. Even a tactical nuclear warhead, detonated squarely against that armored carapace, barely registered, a mere ripple against its impervious hide. As the monster writhed, each massive movement churned the ocean into a swirling vortex, the surrounding water rushing toward its rolling form as though the entire sea quaked at its awakening. The American fleet, no match for such titanic power, was crushed under its sheer bulk, wrecked in an instant by the monstrous force. It was as if an ancient sea god had risen again. Then came a thunderous crash. With a deafening roar, the Leviathan slammed its bulk back into the water, sending tremors rippling through the very crust of the earth. Seawater exploded skyward, coalescing into a towering wall of water 100 meters high, a moving dam of liquid fury, surging forward with apocalyptic momentum. The sea heaved as if possessed, the waves swelling into a living mountain torrent, a tsunami unleashed. In its path, the sturdiest warships pitched and cracked. Submarines, once hidden beneath the surface, were dragged up and shattered. Decks buckled under the prey, sure, hulls groaned, and before long, entire vessels capsized or vanished beneath the roiling crest. Jagged wreckage floated in chaotic fragments, some warped into grotesque shapes, others ripped clean in two. On the seabed below, submarine hulks lay silent, eternal monuments to a power they could not resist. The water ran a vivid crimson, a brutal contrast against the deep blue that remained untouched beyond the waves' reach. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood, each inhalation a reminder of lives extinguished. In a single sweep, this monstrous wave could overturn the entire American fleet. Faced with Gatanja's armada, it would have crushed an aircraft carrier into twisted scrap. Against such raw fury, every human warship lay helpless. Ethan stood on the deck of the once proud American flagship, jaw clenched as the monstrous creature's blows tore through steel and armor like tissue paper. The fleet's state-of-the-art guns and defenses, things they had relied on without question, proved utterly useless against that primeval fury. Waves of fire and shrapnel vanished into the beast's armored hide. Around him, the once confident sailors were hushed by dread. News of the disaster swept across the globe in hours. Rivals who'd longed to see America humbled were briefly jubilant, but that joy turned to cold fear almost at once. If the greatest naval power in history could be so helpless, what hope did anyone else have? Governments and military planners in every capital fell into anxious silence, realizing that humanity no longer held dominion over this world. Creatures from myth, sea monsters, demons, horrors of every description were leaking out of legends into reality, threatening civilization itself. Back on board, Ethan watched his crewmates exchange tremulous whispers. Officers pored over maps and satellite feeds, scrambling to rethink their entire strategy. Some enlisted men began talking about abandoning the coasts altogether, seeking refuge inland or even overseas. As panic spread faster than any tidal wave, one grim truth crystallized in Ethan's mind. The age of human supremacy was over, and nobody yet knew how to survive what came next. Tiangong District, on the outskirts of New Tokyo City in the island nation, has emerged as something of a sanctuary, far removed from the rampaging monsters. Privately, senior U.S. officials are already debating whether to relocate key personnel and critical assets there. In a world teeming with unknown dangers, staying alive has become the highest priority. Ghidorah has laid waste to the garrison fleets defending both Tokyo and the United States. The nest creature in Kyoto still lives, its influence growing day by day, threatening not just the island nation but the entire globe. Now an even more daunting adversary has arisen from the depths, the sea monster Gatengia. Enormous beyond imagination, it must eat vast quantities of prey every day simply to survive. The coastal waters of a single island nation cannot possibly satisfy its appetite. If Gatengia is driven to scour the world's oceans for food, it could devastate marine ecosystems, wiping out the seafood we rely on and rendering the seas uninhabitable for human activity. And worst of all, no one can predict where these titans will strike next. Chapter 1182, Asking the God of the Human World for Help. Ethan stood at the head of the briefing table, dark circles under his eyes betraying the hours he'd spent analyzing the data. Around him, military officers, scientists, and government advisors leaned forward, their faces pale beneath the harsh overhead lights. No one spoke. All of them knew the truth he was about to lay bare. Our current systems, Ethan began, simply can't detect those creatures in time. He tapped a projected slide, showing an enormous silhouette rising from the ocean. These so-called giant monsters transcend every physical law we know. Radar, satellites, underground seismic sensors. None of it works against them. They materialize without warning, often deep beneath the earth or sea, and only announce themselves when it's too late. A naval commander shifted in his seat. You're saying that if one of these things popped up off our coast, we'd be blind until it was on shore. Exactly. Ethan's voice was steady but grim. By the time our radars pick up any disturbance in the water, the monster has already breached the surface. The moment it claws its way ashore, it's inside our so-called defenses. Our weapons, guided missiles, railguns, even high-yield nukes, are pitifully ineffective. These beings shrug off everything we can throw at them. A murmur ran through the room. A civilian advisor cleared her throat. But can't we evacuate people ahead of time? Move them underground if necessary? That won't work. Ethan shook his head. Underground shelters are finite. Our cities hold tens of millions. We literally don't have enough subterranean space to hide everyone. Besides, once a monster appears, entire power grids and transit lines go down. People would be trapped in tunnels, in subways, in fallout shelters with no food, no water, no hope. Silence fell again. Ethan switched slides to a world map dotted with blinking red alerts. This is not just a threat to one nation. If one of these creatures shows up anywhere, America, Europe, Asia, no army, no advanced nation can stop it. The moment the first one arrives, that country is on the brink of collapse. He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. We've reached the end of conventional options. That's why we must pursue the unthinkable. We need to call upon the God of the human world. The room erupted in startled whispers. Even among the most forward-thinking advisors, invoking a divine being was uncharted territory. Ethan met their gaze. We have nowhere else to turn. He clenched his jaw. Our survival depends on hope. Hope that the God of the human world will answer us when our science fails. As the delegates sat in stunned silence, Ethan wondered if faith would prove stronger than any weapon he'd ever known. Moreover, the sheer force of these giants is enough to fracture even the thickest rock layers and obliterate underground shelters. The world's 5 great powers, America, Russia, Japan, Britain, and France, have all been tracking Gatengia's every move. Now, as the creature rose from the sea off the island nation, it began a slow, deliberate swim. Each swing of its colossal tail sent towering tsunamis crashing toward coastal settlements, leaving destruction in its wake. Based on the monster's heading and speed, its next target is the United States. The head of the intelligence department's voice reverberated through the conference room, each syllable landing like a hammer blow. His announcement, so sudden, so dire, sent shockwaves of fear rippling through the assembled officials. In Washington, senior leaders were summoned to an emergency meeting to devise a response. The war room was dimly lit, its atmosphere heavy with tension. At the head of the long table sat the president, brow furrowed, his eyes scanning the faces of his advisors as they braced for the crisis to come. Ethan stood on the high command deck, eyes glued to the banks of radar screens that flickered with countless blips of light. Their enemy, an unstoppable force immune to every conventional weapon, had rendered strategy sessions nearly pointless. Still, as the nation's leader, he refused to give in to despair. "All units, maximum readiness," he ordered, voice steady despite the knot in his chest. Within moments, American fighter squadrons roared into the skies, sweeping the airspace on relentless patrols. At sea, carrier groups and destroyer flotillas slipped quietly from port, engines idling as they awaited their next command. On every display, the flickering dots grew into tight formations, fleets and fighter wings mobilizing in a tense ballet of steel and firepower. But Ethan knew these preparations might only delay the inevitable. In their last encounter, the Pacific Fleet's 3rd and 7th Fleets had been utterly annihilated by Ghidorah and Gitanja. It wasn't just the ships and pilots that were lost, but a devastating blow to humanity's confidence. The memory of those courageous men and women, cut down in an instant, still haunted him, and now a fresh threat loomed on the horizon. Even the mighty Atlantic Fleet, bristling with battleships and submarines, would stand little chance against these colossal adversaries. They were, Ethan feared, lambs led to the slaughter. On the bridge, fleet commanders gathered in strained silence, their gazes fixed on the distant, hazy line where sea met sky. Their faces were drawn with worry and helplessness. Ethan drew a slow breath, squared his shoulders, and issued his next order, determined to defend his people, even if victory seemed impossible. Ethan stood before the command center's massive screens, watching the live feeds in stunned silence. No matter how thoroughly they'd prepared, their power felt insignificant against these behemoths, creatures that defied all human understanding. The target before them was the very heart of the United States, the nation's capital. As the political, economic, and cultural center of the country, it was a sacred symbol for millions. If it fell, the upheaval wouldn't be limited to Washington, D.C. alone. Social order would crack, and Wall Street, the economic lifeblood of America, would tremble under the strain. Across the globe, the world's great powers were already reaching out. The Federation of Vodka, the Eastern Empire, Great Britain, and the Republic of France had all sent messages of concern, and, behind the scenes, offers of help. In an era defined by interdependence, no nation could stand apart. If America were forced to its knees, the ripple effects would drag the entire planet into chaos. At its core, this was a battle between humanity and monsters, a fight that transcended borders and politics. Recognizing that truth, the major powers reluctantly agreed to provide limited support. For against threats of this scale, no single country could prevail alone. Ethan exhaled slowly. The stakes had never been higher, and the real fight was only just beginning. Only by pooling their experience and fighting monsters together could humanity hope to turn the tide. One by one, nations pledged support, sending weapons and equipment, sharing intelligence, and dispatching scientific researchers and technical experts. Yet above all these offers, the United States coveted a single figure, the legendary God of the World, Ethan. Ethan was the only man known to have faced down a Leviathan-class monster and lived. His very name had become a symbol of defiance in the face of despair. "We must enlist the God of the World's help, no matter the cost," America's leaders declared. In fact, a daring proposal even called for the recovery of 6 lost sacred tomes said to unlock his full potential. "Please, gather all 6 volumes." Loosed upon the government's highest councils, this plan shone like a beacon in the darkness, offering a sliver of hope. Ethan's strength had already eclipsed dragon level and soared into the realm of the divine. If he could be persuaded to fight on humanity's side, America might yet survive. So they assembled their finest, top operatives, expert negotiators, covert agents, and sent them out to find Ethan and persuade Mem to stand with mankind against the monster threat. The team assembled for this mission were America's finest, hand-picked agents and negotiation specialists, each a master of rhetoric, diplomacy, and psychological insight. They'd been briefed not only on strategy, but on Ethan's background, temperament, and weaknesses. Their mandate was simple yet audacious: win Ethan's loyalty by any means necessary. To that end, the U.S. government had prepared lavish incentives. They promised Ethan enormous financial rewards, sweeping political authority, unfettered access to resources, and even the disclosure of select classified intelligence. Their hope was twofold. First, to dazzle him into becoming America's guardian, and second, to exploit his ambitions once he was in their debt. With Ethan on their side, they believed they could shape global affairs and secure America's position as the world's premier power. Time was of the essence. Rather than rely on slower commercial flights, the team boarded the fastest military transport plane bound for New Tokyo, often called Second Tokyo since its frantic post-war resurrection. From the air, the city looked like a glittering phoenix, skyscrapers of glass and steel shooting up amid cranes and scaffolding. But as the transport approached its assigned elevation for descent, a critical problem became glaringly obvious. Second Tokyo had no airport capable of handling such a large aircraft. Despite the city's astonishingly swift rebuilding efforts, no runway existed that could accommodate the transport's wingspan or its weight. Now, faced with a logistical dead end, and only hours to complete their mission, the agents and negotiators would have to improvise. Their grand plans to enthrall Ethan hung in the balance, tethered to a single unsolved problem: how to get him and themselves safely to the heart of a city with no landing strip. Ethan realized they no longer needed to rush the airport's construction. Time simply wasn't on their side. Confronted with the unfolding crisis, the team quickly agreed on a low-altitude parachute drop. For the field agents, this maneuver was routine. For the negotiation specialists, however, it would be a trial unlike any they'd ever faced.